Hi loves, in today's video we're going to be discussing Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, ex-Prince Andrew, and we're going to be going over absolutely everything about him, the whole backstory, lots of stories you won't have heard before, and some pictures you definitely won't have seen before because I had some pictures given to me by an ex-Palace staff member who gave me pictures of inside Andrew's Buckingham Palace apartment. And yes, there are pictures of the teddy bears. So we'll be going over all of that today. Just so you know, this is a compilation video, so it's two videos together, but there's lots of information that I really don't see discussed a lot of places. I will leave linked in the description box and pinned comment the sources that I've used to make these videos. They'll have absolutely everything: books, interviews, articles, videos, clips. I will also leave down there a link to my main channel, Coffee and Colds, my social media, Patreon, all of that stuff. But there is a lot to discuss with ex-Prince Andrew, so let's get into the video. And of course, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed the video. 25 years ago, a young girl visiting London asked to have her photograph taken with a prince. At the time, no one could have foreseen that this one simple picture would go on to throw the 1,000-year-old, $30 billion British royal family into their biggest controversy since the abdication of Edward VIII in 1936. Today, most people know the horrendous details behind this infamous picture, but as you'll learn throughout this video, there's a lot more to the story of the former prince, because the rot at the palace penetrated deep, and it wasn't just Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor that was rewriting history. It even stretched as far as the award-winning interview that exposed Andrew on a global scale, and most people will be surprised to hear a very different story than the one that's been portrayed in award speeches and on Netflix and Amazon Prime. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor has lived a life of unimaginable privilege, and yet behind closed doors, he was using his power, wealth, connections, and royal fame to allegedly commit unspeakable crimes and to enable the vile actions of monsters Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Andrew wants people to believe that his friendship with these monsters was just an unfortunate blemish on a distinguished royal career, but nothing could be further from the truth, because Andrew's relationships with Epstein and Maxwell are just 2 points on a very long list of horrendous and crooked behaviours reported to have happened over the last several decades. And so that's what we'll be discussing today. Everything most people don't know about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, along with the scores of people who helped, enabled, and covered up for the Queen's favourite son. And some of these stories might even reshape how you look at Andrew, the royal family, and even the interview that brought down a prince. On February 19th, 1960, the Queen gave birth to her third child, her second son, the first child she'd had as Queen, and the first child to be born to a reigning monarch in over 100 years. Andrew would later go on in 1986 to be bestowed the Queen's cherished title of Duke of York, until this title was stripped from him this year, 2025. Andrew has always been widely reported to be the Queen's favourite child, and he and his younger brother, Prince Edward, were raised quite differently to their older siblings, Charles and Anne. With the Queen being the Queen, she didn't have the usual relationship with her children that a mother does, or even a lot of the modern royal mothers do. Someone like Princess Diana has had many stories over the years written about her and her affection for her children and how involved she was with her sons William and Harry, whereas the Queen followed the normal royal protocols raising her children. It wasn't unusual for her to return from a long trip and shake the hand of a 2, 3, or 4-year-old at the time, young Prince Charles. The Queen became the monarch at only 20 1925 when her father suddenly passed away. She had Charles and Anne before she became queen, but having Andrew and Edward a little bit into her reign meant that she was much more settled as the monarch, and it's always been reported that she treated her two younger sons much differently than Charles and Anne. Andrew was sent to Gordonstoun boarding school in Scotland, where his father and his older brother Charles had gone. He was reportedly a poor student, which was not unusual for a lot of the royal family. I will talk about this a little bit later, but one of my cousins actually went to school and was in Prince Harry's class at Eton. Throughout childhood and school, Andrew was always looking for ways to be the center of attention, and given that he was the son of the Queen, most of the time he did get this attention, if not always. After school, Andrew did serve in the Royal Navy and the Falklands War. Over the years, he's had many nicknames by the public and the press, one of which was Air Miles Andy for his constant travel and spending, which we will get into later, as his spending was one of the major reasons he got so close to the wealthy Jeffrey Epstein. And another nickname of Andrew's that was probably the most well known by the public and the media was Randy Andy, which that will majorly come back to bite him later in the story whenever all of his ties to Epstein came out. His lesser used nickname was Action Andy, and this was probably the nickname that the royal family would have preferred used by the press, but it never really stuck. Andrew's time in the Navy and as a helicopter pilot, along with his love of shooting and golf and riding and outdoor stuff in general, meant that his interests were very in line with the taste of the Queen, so this was something else they bonded over. Many people have reported over the years that to the Queen, Andrew could do no wrong, and he was allowed to do whatever he wanted. What he wanted, he got. And it's also reportedly these factors that weighed heavily into the disastrous 2019 interview between Andrew and BBC journalist Emily Maitlis and it going ahead in the first place. Andrew wanted to do the interview, and despite many people and royal advisors advising against the interview, it was reported that Andrew wanted to do it and the Queen trusted her son, although it has been said later that the Queen did not know the full extent of the interview, and it was her who intervened when the full transcripts came out of the interview. I think it's very important to understand Andrew's place in the royal family, as I think it's very much factored into the person that he is, even in comparison to other members of the royal family, or the firm, which is what the royals themselves refer to this kind of combination of family, business, and the crown. When they're speaking of the kind of entity of the royal family, they call it the firm. Andrew was born one of the most privileged people on earth, but being a royal isn't just being rich and living in a palace. There's so much more that goes into it, because from the day they are born, they are told you are better than everyone else just because of the family you were born into. When Andrew was born, he was second in line to the throne because prior to Prince William's children, the line of succession favored the male line. There are some bits of succession and titles that I will explain, but I'll try and keep it as straightforward as possible because it can honestly go on forever. The Queen's children in age order are Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. And once Andrew, a male, was born, Andrew was favored over Anne. So even though that's the age order, the succession order is Charles, Andrew, Edward, Anne. But this was all changed in 2013 for Prince William's children onwards. And that's why Prince William's children, who are George, Charlotte, and Louis, if they had been born 50 years ago, Charlotte would have been passed over for Louis. Louis would have been the spare, but now the succession line just runs age. It doesn't matter about gender. So it's Prince George, Princess Charlotte is the spare, and then Prince Louis afterwards. This was all changed in 2011 by the Queen. There was a ton of other stuff that was changed as well, and it came into law in 2013, but Anything prior to that isn't affected. So still Andrew is after Charles, Edward, and it's only effective from William onwards, basically. For that reason, Andrew had a lot more privileges. All of this birth order stuff matters so much. You have many more privileges and rights as the second son of the monarch rather than the third son, and so on. And what order you are in line of succession is a huge deal too. Andrew still to this day in December 2025 still retains his line in the order of succession, which is 8th behind William and his 3 children, Harry and his 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, and the order then it runs through the heir's children, then onto normally the sibling of the heir, and so onward. So you have someone like Andrew who really was second in line after Charles, but when both of Charles's kids come along and their sets of children, it pushes him down to 8th. It's also quite fascinating looking at the spares throughout even just recent history, as they're told, oh, you are this amazing person who can do no wrong. You are so important. You get every privilege in the world possible, but there's one person who is much more important than you. That all seems to have big time factored into Andrew becoming who he became. There are scores of people over the years, from household staff to ex-friends, reporters, and all manners of people, who have said Andrew by far was the most difficult royal to deal with, and he was obsessed with his own importance, and he would blow up at people and scream that he was the second son of the Queen and he was a prince, the Duke of York, and whatever it was that he was wanting someone to do or however he was treating someone, only that mattered, was that he was a prince and the Queen's son, and he could do whatever he wanted. I will also explain how the changes that just happened in November and December 2025 will have caused Andrew major humiliation, even behind closed doors. To give some brief background on Andrew's friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, there has always been talk in the royal households about how it was kind of inappropriate that Andrew was friends with Ghislaine Maxwell, and how the Queen might find it inappropriate, long before Jeffrey Epstein ever came on the scene, because Andrew and Ghislaine have been friends for decades. Ghislaine Maxwell was the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was the head of the Mirror Group, which included a bunch of British newspapers, including the Mirror, and he was an absolute crook. He died in mysterious circumstances, which were later revealed to be him falling off the side of his yacht when he was peeing naked into the sea. His death triggered the revelations that he had been pilfering his company's pension funds. He was a true conman. And when Robert Maxwell died, Ghislaine was working for her father, and so his passing cut off her funds and threw her kind of into financial turmoil, and that's when she started her relationship with Epstein, someone else who was exceedingly wealthy and a very sketchy con man. In the 90s, Ghislaine Maxwell would come and have picnics at the palace, and many in the royal staff thought that this would upset the Queen if she knew the daughter of Robert Maxwell was picnicking at the palace. Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell were very close friends, so close that she didn't even stop at the security checkpoints going into the royal residences and was just waved through. This was breaking the protocol, security protocol, royal protocol, but a lot of the police and royal protection officers would allow Andrew to do this with many of his frequent female guests, as if they didn't, Andrew would call the officers at the gate and scream at them and throw an absolute fit. Andrew reports that Ghislaine Maxwell introduced him to Jeffrey Epstein in 1999, although it is worth noting that there are flight logs that have Andrew's wife, Sarah Ferguson, on Jeffrey Epstein's jet in 1998, the year prior. Sarah Ferguson married Andrew in 1986 and they divorced about 10 years later, but they have remained very, very close over the years and still even live together to this day. They have two daughters, Princesses Beatrice and Eugenie, and why Andrew's daughters are princes and HRHs, his or her Royal Highness, and Anne and Edward's kids aren't, that all factors into the line of succession. Anne and Edward were offered to make their kids prince and princesses and HRHs, his or her Royal Highness, but they did decline. Of course, Andrew did not. There have been many reported blow-ups by Andrew over the years when Charles has tried to slim down the monarchy by cutting funding and round-the-clock security for Andrew's daughters, the princesses, which costs the taxpayers millions of pounds a year, especially when Andrew's daughters sometimes live outside the UK. I have always found it funny hearing about him blowing up about his daughters not being treated the same as William and Harry when his entire existence is based on the very system he's arguing against. He's arguing they need to be treated the same as William, who's the heir to the throne. And if you believe, like he does, this system, then no, they shouldn't be treated the same because William is heir to the throne by the logic of the royals and succession. So it just goes to show you one of the many, many reasons that Andrew is only about himself. He's only ever lived his life thinking about himself. And you can say that about a lot of people, like, oh, they're selfish and they don't know or think about other people. But there is no one who exemplifies this more than the royals, especially Prince Andrew, because they don't know what it is like to be a normal person or even to have to think about other people, normal people. They've never been late for something. They've never even packed their own bag because the plane, the boat, the train, the car, whatever it is, waits for them. It's only ever about them. And that is also something very important to understand Prince Andrew and why he does think he is so untouchable. After meeting in 1999, there were many reports over the years of Andrew and Epstein socializing, and these have been supported by things like flight logs, pictures, and former friends of Epstein and Andrew speaking about dinner parties they both attended, or Andrew coming and staying at many of Epstein's houses on a number of different occasions. It was during one of these many social events that the picture I mentioned in the very beginning of the video was taken. The picture of Andrew and Jeffrey Epstein's at the time 17-year-old victim, Virginia Giuffre. Virginia said that she was trafficked by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell to London specifically for Andrew in 2001, and this picture was taken at Maxwell's London Belgravia home. Virginia had asked to have her picture taken with Andrew to send to her family and friends as she was meeting a real prince. Jeffrey Epstein took the picture, which is now infamous, and Andrew and Virginia are standing with Maxwell off to the side. One thing I don't see discussed much about this image is how insanely bizarre it is that Andrew has his arm around this 17-year-old's waist. Yes, it is obviously creepy, this situation being described without names, like two middle-aged men, a middle-aged woman, having a party with a 17-year-old and one of the men has their arm around her waist. Like, that is creepy. But it being a member of the royal family, this is how you know this picture was supposed to be completely private and they thought no one would ever see it outside of maybe Virginia showing it to her brother or something, because royals do not touch other people. And you won't even see like William and Kate touching. And I don't mean like something even kind of intimate like that. Like they won't even hold hands. It is exceedingly rare to see them touch in any way. And you would really have to dig to see, like, I can't even think of the Queen or Prince Philip like in any way outside of maybe like their wedding day or something, or when they do the balcony scene on one of the royal wedding days and they kiss and everything like that. Outside of that, like, it very rarely happens in any way. And that's why like Meghan and Harry were seen as like very kind of breaking royal protocol, because they do hold hands or like put their hands on one another's shoulder and stuff like that. And obviously like now it doesn't matter because they're not senior working royals, but everything with the royals is completely rules and protocols and things that you wouldn't even think matter. There will be a book of rules about, like, when William and Kate pull up to an event, there's a whole protocol about who gets out of the car first, who walks first, who greets the person first, everything like that. And this also all factors into everything with Andrew and Epstein, because nothing with the royals happens in isolation. There's always people around, there's always protocols, there's always documentation and proof. And that's why it's interesting that Andrew hasn't been able to in any way show, I wasn't here, I didn't do this, because yes, it was a long time ago, but they're constantly surrounded by people. There is security always and logs of people coming in and out and all of this other stuff. And everything else with timelines and things seems to support what Epstein's victims have said rather than Andrew, who has really produced nothing except for his own word.
The policeman who was on the North Gate at Buckingham Palace knows that Andrew came back that night. He wasn't down and working at a Pizza Express, and he asked to have, under data protection rules, the logbooks for that night, which he was entitled to have. And the palace said, I'm afraid you can't have these under grounds of national security. And then when he said, well, actually, there's no national security here, the data protection rules, and you must release them, they then said that they had actually destroyed the material.
Virginia has detailed in her book and many interviews that after this picture was taken, she had been assaulted by Andrew. She has also detailed going to Tramp nightclub with him in London, and on the evening that she was there, he was dancing with her and was profusely sweating, and she also said that he was a terrible dancer. And she said that she had also been assaulted by him 2 other times, once at Epstein's home in Florida and a 3rd time on Epstein's private island, Little St. James, in the Virgin Islands. There have also been several individuals over the years that have said they've seen Andrew at a number of Epstein's residences, and one individual said that he walked in on Andrew having a woman massaging and licking his feet. There's also been numerous stories over the years with Sarah Ferguson, Andrew's ex-wife, involving her feet, and there was even pictures associated with her that were released in numerous newspapers, and this involved one of her many partners over the years. And this story being so public and shared so widely with pictures was one of the inciting incidents that had Sarah Ferguson start to be removed from the royal family life, even though her 2 daughters were obviously members of the royal family. The royal family, of course, are very familiar with affairs, and Andrew and Sarah Ferguson's escapades being made so public was one of the things that really prompted the Queen and the royal family to behoove them to get a divorce. They had allegedly numerous affairs while both married, while they were getting divorced, and they have had so many different stories come out over the years about all of their various relationships and when they were married, their mistresses and things. And within the royal family, there's even this kind of weird mistresses through the generations. It's quite well known that Camilla, who's the now queen, was of course Charles's mistress at one stage, and her great grandmother was the mistress of Edward VII, Charles's great grandfather. And something that's been reported a lot outside the mainstream media, not so much inside the mainstream media, was that Prince Philip had an affair with Sarah Ferguson's mother, Susan, long before Andrew and Fergie were married, and just decades before even they were on the scene. This was when Sarah Ferguson was a child, and her mother, like Diana's, lost custody of her when she was a child. And this was something that Diana and Fergie bonded over, as they were friends long before Fergie was married to Andrew. And it was actually Diana, the Princess of Wales, who introduced Fergie to Andrew. I will, of course, leave all of my sources for anything I'm mentioning down in the description box and the pinned comment in the Google link. And I've also started putting the last couple of videos a playlist with all of the interviews and news reports and things that I watch or like show clips of, so those will be down there as well, along with several books that I read for this video. The main two being Virginia Giuffre's recently released memoir Nobody's Girl, and the month before Virginia's book came out, there was a book released by Dr. Andrew Lowney, who ended up doing a book about the rise and the fall of the Yorks, and it's titled Entitled, and he has put a ton of work into this book. There's been so many stories that have come out of this book. I will mention quite a few in the rest of the video, and he's also done a number of interviews where he's talked about things that he had to take out of the book for legal reasons, and a lot of the things that he spoke about in his book have actually ended up coming out in it hasn't even been out that long. It's been out like 2 months. So it is very interesting to read. And this isn't someone that has done a couple of months worth of research and things. I will go into a bit more detail about him and where he sourced a lot of this information from, because it really is kind of a crazy book to read. As I mentioned earlier, Andrew reports that he met Epstein in 1999 and Sarah Ferguson met him in 98. But there are extensive numbers of people who have tied their friendship to the early 90s. She really doesn't like the royal family, but the late 90s and all through the 2000s, the Yorks began appearing in flight logs and spending significant time with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. The reason this time with Epstein ramped up so significantly in 2001 was because that was also the year that Andrew retired from the Navy. He was given a cushy position in the Navy and then a cushy position after the Navy. He was made trade envoy for the United Kingdom in 2001, and this was a position he held until 2011, when he was first really massively exposed for his ties to Epstein, and when the picture of him and Virginia was first published in the Mail on Sunday. Through the Navy, Andrew was reported to be lazy, arrogant, and frequently would be on leave to perform royal duties, but really he went to go and play golf. After he retired from the Navy in 2001, he had entered his 40s, and many people describe this next decade as his midlife crisis. This is when he started spending so much time with Epstein and Maxwell, and going and staying with Epstein at his various homes in Florida and New York, and his previously aforementioned private island. Andrew and Sarah Ferguson spent so much time with Jeffrey Epstein that they even had a suite of rooms in Epstein's New York mansion called the Britannia Suites that only they stayed in. Over the next 10 years through 2011, it wasn't just the claims with Epstein that came out about Andrew, but there was also an avalanche of other claims about his behavior elsewhere, including his behavior through his role as trade envoy. There are many claims about Andrew spending time in Thailand, and a lot of these stories involve his treatment of women, and there have also been a number of claims from royal royal protection officers who worked at the palace during this period, where they discussed how Andrew would have a constant flow of women brought through the gates of Buckingham Palace on a constant basis. The financial details of Andrew have also been severely scrutinized over the years, and he and Fergie have also had financial ties with Epstein. There are an astonishing plethora of details about Andrew's financial ties to the Middle East, and a lot of these details are in the book that I just mentioned, entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York. As I said, the author of Entitled, Dr. Andrew Lowry, is a historian, and he's written a number of other books and 2 other royal books. Before he started writing about the royal family, he had written mostly books about British intelligence, and he moved into the topic of the royals with Lord Mountbatten, who was the great uncle of Andrew and Charles and the uncle of Prince Philip. He was very involved in Prince Philip's life and in Prince Philip and the Queen meeting in the first place. In the book on Mountbatten, there are very serious claims levied against Lord Mountbatten about him attacking young boys. And when the book was originally released, many people kind of scoffed at the claims about the 2 victims that were interviewed for this book. But since the publishing of the book several years ago, there have been several more victims come forward, and currently there is a case ongoing in Belfast. Mountbatten was killed by the RRA in 1979, and he was a huge figure in the royal family's life. And when Prince Philip was marrying the Queen and renouncing his own royal titles from Greece, he then took the Mountbatten name from his uncle, and it's why Andrew is now known as Mountbatten-Windsor, because the royals don't really have a last name. They end up just going by their titles. And so if there ever are members of the family without titles, like the kids of Princess Anne and the kids of Prince Edward, they said that they didn't want their kids to have titles so that they could lead some sort of normal life. And they came up with this kind of, okay, you're going to use Mountbatten-Windsor. Originally, Prince Philip and Mountbatten just wanted Mountbatten, but a lot of the royal advisors kind of squashed this idea. Traditionally, even though they do have this Mountbatten-Windsor surname, it isn't normally used by the likes of like Prince William and Prince Harry and even Andrew's kids, because when they do have to use some sort of surname, last name, like in school or in the armed forces, they will generally take the title of their parent and use it. So when William and Harry were at school, they would go by William Wales and Harry Wales because their dad was obviously the Prince of Wales. Dr. Andrew Lowry's second book was on the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, the couple whose relationship is kind of the reason that we're dealing with Andrew in the line of succession today. And also just another little bit of information on Andrew Lowry, who wrote the book that I'm mentioning. He isn't just someone who like did research for a month or something, or has just collated a lot of stories from newspapers over the years. He is a historian and has spent years on this book about the Yorks. His previous books had actually been gifted to the Buckingham Palace staff as part of like their Christmas kind of hamper thing they put together. He has done hundreds of interviews and spoken to all sorts of people involved with the royal family and people who knew the Yorks from when they were at school all the way up to present day, people who worked in their house, friends, like all types of people that you can imagine. And there are a lot of things also that the lawyers, his book was published through Collins, and they actually ended up having to take some things out, including a claim about Donald Trump and his wife Melania, which I'll play you the clip of so you can hear it through him. But I will leave also, as I said, a lot of the interviews down below, but specifically with Andrew, so that not Andrew Mountbatten, so that you can watch some of the interviews if you want to, because they are very interesting.
I had various references in my book to Melania Trump. Epstein had actually been her lover before Trump, but Trump didn't like that in the book, so he ordered it to be taken out of the book after about 60,000 copies had been printed. So it seemed to be a pretty pointless gesture, but anyway, my publishers did it, but I keep spreading the word.
Trump pressured for a number of items and stories to be taken out of the book, but another figure who had significant details removed from the book under pressure and legal reasons was Hunter Biden. Andrew Lowry has also said that since publishing the book, which was only like 2 months ago, he has had a ton of other people bring him stories, and he's going to be like putting some in like an updated paperback version, but he is working on another book, which it'll probably be a few years away, but it's going to be called Untitled, apparently. There was only one royal family that's issued a denial since Andrew published his book, and that was Prince Harry over a story about him and Andrew getting into a physical altercation when Harry had announced that he was going to marry Meghan Markle. Andrew apparently said to Harry to get his life together and that his marriage would only last a month because Meghan Markle was too old for him. I mean, the gall of Andrew to say any of that to him. But apparently, Prince Harry has said this isn't true. I will talk a little bit more about Harry in a little bit because, as I mentioned, my cousin did go to school with Harry, although my cousin wasn't like close to him or anything like that. But an immediate member of my family, I have to be very careful with what I'm saying here, but an immediate member of my family is friends with one of Harry's closest, like lifelong friends. And they have certainly told me a lot of illuminating things about even just being friends with someone who is a senior member of the royal family and the kind of protocols that they have to go through and what happens if something's going on and there's trouble or there's issues. And I will go into that towards the very end of the video because it is very fascinating. But the person that I said was friends with Harry since like childhood, he actually did say to me that he hasn't been as close to him since he got married and of course since he moved to the US, and they have been friends since they were kids, and Harry's like a few years older than me, so I will talk about that and a story or two at the end. But at the heart of this Andrew Lowry book, it is quite honestly, yes, like very illuminating about a lot of the Jeffrey Epstein friendship. And there's a lot of other disgusting, vile allegations being committed by Andrew, and the allegations against Virginia Giuffre and all the other situations over the years about these girls and women that have come forward, they are abhorrent, but there are also huge, huge financial ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And especially Sarah Ferguson has been bailed out by Jeffrey Epstein with money many, many times. There aren't exact figures for how much Sarah and Andrew received from Jeffrey Epstein over the years, but many people have reported this number to be into the millions. And it's also allegedly these money problems that kept Andrew and Sarah being friends with Epstein even after his arrests. And that's the mid 2000s arrest and the 2010 arrest, even though Andrew emphatically denied that he did not speak to Epstein after those infamous pictures in New York at the end of 2010. There was recently released emails that showed Andrew sending emails to Epstein in 2011, and there's also emails between Epstein and Sarah Ferguson after this 2010 day as well. Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell were even invited to the 18th birthday of Princess Beatrice, Andrew and Sarah's oldest daughter, and can you imagine knowing who Jeffrey Epstein is and inviting him to your own daughter's 18th birthday that your other 16-year-old daughter is at and all of their friends are at? And this wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein that was there. Harvey Weinstein was also there as well. And there's a very famous picture of Epstein, Weinstein, and Maxwell at this party. Bringing their daughters to meet these type of people is nothing new for Andrew and Sarah, though, because they brought their daughters on numerous vacations with Epstein. Sarah Ferguson brought the daughters to meet Epstein after he was released from prison the first time, and I say prison in air quotes. They also, as I said, had Harvey Weinstein at the daughter's birthday party. And Sarah Ferguson also brought the daughters to meet Sean Combs' Diddy. Andrew and Sarah have also brought their daughters in on a number of their very questionable financial situations as well. I cannot overstate how being a royal isn't like being an influencer or a celebrity. They should not be enriching themselves through all of these incredibly allegedly sketchy ways. There's also the fact that when they bring their daughters to meet Epstein or Diddy, there is obscene amounts of money being spent on the daughter's security that they did receive up till 2011, which is when Prince Charles or King Charles kind of nixed it then, but they were receiving this insane millions of pounds being spent on security despite the fact they weren't working royals, and it was all because Andrew insisted on them having it and all these other insane things. When Andrew invited Epstein and Weinstein to his daughter's 18th birthday in 2006, it was only several weeks before that that Epstein had been investigated for what he was arrested for in 2006, which was rape of children. And they ended up going so far to basically just let him get off scot-free, even though he did plead guilty to the charges, and even the charges which were prostitution, which is insane because his victim was literally a child. They ended up giving him 13 months in prison, which I'm using air quotes because it wasn't any sort of punishment, because he was allowed to be on work release, which meant he was sleeping in prison at the weekends, which it's like a country club, it's not like a prison. And the rest of the time he went to his office, he was allowed to do as he pleased. He continued on with his life. And even if he was in prison for that time, 13 months for that unforgivable crime is insane. And all of this was just swept under the rug, nothing to see here, and nobody cared or gave it any attention. And he was being investigated when he was at this princess's 18th birthday party. The thought that they didn't know that he was being investigated is insane to me, especially hearing everything that I've heard about how even like friends are looked into. And only 8 days after the birthday party was when Epstein was arrested in 2006. And Andrew still claims he knew nothing about it before the birthday party and nothing about it afterwards. It was only when the newspapers published about it years later that he learned about it, despite the fact that very recent information has come out that showed not only was Andrew staying with Epstein all the time, but he was speaking to him at least once a week, every week. In 2011, the photo of Andrew and Virginia Giuffre is published for the first time in the Mail on Sunday. And as I've said in videos before, the Daily Mail is gross and invasive and it sensationalizes everything, but there are certain situations where they do come through, and they usually are a lot of the time the only people that will publish certain things like this or be the first to kind of do it, and then everybody else will follow suit.
2001. And I have to say that if Virginia Giuffre had not been tracked down by Sharon Churcher from the Mail on Sunday and given her story, we wouldn't know anything about any of this.
The photo of Andrew and Virginia was printed in February 2011, and another famous picture or infamous picture was printed that month in another newspaper tabloid called The News of the World, which is now defunct. But that picture was also one that just went on to haunt Andrew. And this is, apart from the Virginia Giuffre one, this is the other infamous picture, and it is Andrew and Epstein walking in Central Park. Andrew was actually staying with Epstein at his New York mansion for 5 days, and Andrew claims that he went to New York to break up the friendship with Epstein over his arrest and everything else being made public. And there were several parties thrown in Andrew's honor. As I said, he was there for 5 days. He stayed with Epstein. And after the visit, Epstein gave money to Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. They claim it was 15K, but most other sources put it closer to 200K. In his disastrous interview that we're going to get into that happened in 2019, Andrew claims that he was too honorable to end the friendship over the phone, and that's why he went and spent almost a week with a convicted pedophile that he knew was a convicted pedophile and threw parties with this absolute creep, all because he was too honorable and wanted to break the friendship up in person. As of a few weeks ago, we know this isn't true. We know that what he said in the 2019 interview about that was the end of the friendship and we never spoke again, we know it isn't true because there was emails just released like 2 weeks ago that show Andrew emailing Jeffrey Epstein and talking about how concerned he was about the photos of him and Virginia coming out, and a back and forth with him and Epstein discussing how worried they were about one another. And Andrew even signs off the email to the convicted pedophile will play again soon with 4 exclamation points. So both of these infamous pictures of Andrew that paint the clearest picture of what's going on come out in February 2011, and the other significant Andrew news that month was after these pictures were published, he is given a very high honor by his mother, the Queen. He was made a Knight of the Order. And this is a pattern that you will see where there's a significant development with the Jeffrey Epstein situation, or there's a huge amount of public pressure between 2011 and 2019, and time again, Andrew was protected by the palace and the late Queen. I'm probably going to be beheaded for saying this, or be like they're going to call for treason or something. But he was given accolades. He was, if there wasn't accolades to give him, he was put in some prominent placement, or he was with the Queen going into church or in the car with her driving somewhere, so that it was this unspoken message of I support my son. We, as the royal family, support Andrew, even though that's not allegedly how other members of the royal family felt, especially King Charles. I always want to say Prince Charles, and I have trouble saying this too, the Prince and Princess of Wales, William and Kate. What I find especially wild about this whole story and all of it coming out is there's actually two insane parts to this story about two unsung heroes in all of this absolute shit with Andrew and Epstein. Two women who I don't think hardly anyone watching this will have heard of, especially one of them. And one of the stories concerns the Newsnight interview that I've referenced a little bit, the 2019 interview that everyone who knows anything about this will know about, where Andrew just looked like the biggest idiot and most guilty idiot in the world. So the Newsnight interview, and the thing that I think is insane that there's a massive unsung hero in that situation, put a pin in that. But there's another unsung hero in this whole situation with Virginia Giuffre and Andrew and Epstein, because this story should have come out 3 years before it came out. There was an American reporter at ABC named Amy Robach who 3 years before everything kicked off with Andrew, before things even came out about Epstein, when hardly anyone knew who he was, she had done an investigation, Amy Robach, into everything with Epstein. She had found Virginia Giuffre, who at this point was pretty much in hiding in Australia. And the only reason that this is known, that Amy Robach did this whole investigation, spoke to Virginia, had all the research and did months of investigating, this is only known because Amy Robach made like an off-camera remark to her crew one day in the studio when she'd finished reporting on a Jeffrey Epstein story. And when they cut to commercial or cut away, she basically said to the crew and the people around her how pissed she was that she had done this story 3 years before. She'd done all the legwork, all the research, spoken to Virginia. Virginia said that she'd speak and everything was in place. But when they put the information to the palace, which is very common, especially in British journalism and especially when dealing with the royals, it's very easy also to sue people in the UK for defamation and libel. So they will always, and journalism in general, will give them a right of reply. It's always at the end of like documentaries when they say, oh, we reached out to Prince Andrew, but he had no comment, or they give you like a line or something. You are always supposed to present what you found so that they can counter it or give more context or whatever. So when ABC, who AB Roback was working for, went to the palace said, if you put this story out, we will crush you. We will cut you off from all royal correspondence. We will cut you off from all access. You will lose anything to do with the royals forever. And at this stage, when this was happening, this was when William and Kate, their wedding, and ABC didn't want to lose that royal access, which is a huge bring in for them of people. So they ended up bowing to the pressure of the palace and they killed the story.
I've had the story for 3 years. I've had this interview with Virginia Roberts. We would not put it on the air. The palace found out that we had her whole allegations about Prince Andrew and threatened us a million different ways. She told me everything. She had pictures. She had everything. She was in hiding for 12 years. We convinced her to come out. I'm so pissed right now. Like 3 years ago saying there will come a day where we will realize Jeffrey Epstein was the most prolific country has ever known. And I had it all 3 years ago.
The only thing really done in 2011 when all of these pictures came out and the story started to emerge about Andrew and Epstein was Andrew was removed from his role as trade ambassador. And there'd been complaints about him from the beginning. So many complaints about his behavior, how he treated people, how he spoke to people, how embarrassing he was for the UK. But any complaints just fell on deaf ears because he was the Queen's favorite son. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't arrested until July 2019, and as most people, if not everyone watching this will know, the following month in August 2019 was when he was found in his Manhattan cell and he had allegedly taken his own life. There were a lot of questions raised, and there's still a lot of questions about his passing, and there's a lot of circumstances that look incredibly questionable and sketchy. I do really want to do a video or probably a series of videos on everything with Epstein because my psychic powers are now 5 for 5. Every topic I pick to do a video on, there's some massive significant development either while I'm working on the video or just after I release it. And I'm filming this on the 18th of December, so there is supposed to be more Epstein files released in the next day or two, and I do think there'll be more about Andrew in it. I think that it is a difficult topic to cover on YouTube, especially because I don't do sponsorships. So I will look at doing it in 2026. And I am really interested in doing other videos about the royal family and even just another about Andrew and Fergie because there's so much more to go into outside of the Epstein stuff. But I do think there will be further correspondence between Epstein and Andrew and other information that will come out in these files. So if that happens and there's enough to warrant another video, then I definitely would want to do that. But over the 2010s, there were more and more headlines and stories coming out about Andrew, and people were being really fed up with him just kind of swanning around, being paid for by the UK taxpayers who fund the monarchy, and nothing happening. It just kind of falling on deaf ears. But when everything happened with Epstein in 2019, the pressure and spotlight on this situation was becoming untenable, and the palace and Andrew really couldn't ignore it any longer. And his advisors, especially his private secretary, Amanda Thirst, decided that Andrew should do an interview and address the whole situation, which is so surprising for the royals because, as most people will know, their famous motto is never complain, never explain. In 2019, when all of this pressure was mounting, Andrew's main job was to be the head of this thing called Pitch at the Palace, which was kind of like a young entrepreneur royal version of Dragon's Den, where young entrepreneurs would come in, pitch their business, and hope to get funding. There were a number of extremely questionable people involved with this pitch at the palace, and also questionable people who received money from this. And of course, there's also like legitimate people who got help from it. But it was later also found, and Andrew Lowry talks about this in his book, that Andrew himself was taking 2% of the money for himself privately and going into this separate company called Pitch at the Palace Global, which was where he was putting this 2% for himself. As I mentioned earlier, there are extensive stories about Andrew's questionable financial dealings, so it's not really that surprising that he was finding a way to profit, because that's allegedly what he normally does. Even if you don't look into like all of these specific financial stories about all these ties in the Middle East and in Asia and things, there's even evidence like in the open. The fact that, yes, he was gifted like this insane house by the Queen that had like a helipad and a pool and a cinema, but he also was able to buy an 18 million pound ski chalet. Like, that's insane for someone that's supposed to be on 275K a year. 18 million pound ski chalet. And there's also always been reports about this room inside his house called Aladdin's Cave, which just contained gifts piled to the ceiling from people that Andrew and Sarah Ferguson had these relationships with. And a lot of the time they would send them very expensive jewelry. And there's even things that brought the daughters in, and mysterious amounts of money being deposited into theirs or their daughter's private bank accounts. And they'd be labeled things like birthday gift when their birthday was like 7 months away. Of course, Sarah Ferguson has also sold everything possible, which I cannot stress enough. The royal should not profit from being a royal. And especially Sarah Ferguson isn't even a royal anymore. And everything possible that she could do, she did. And she would always attach her Duchess title, even though she doesn't have it anymore. And she would be like the ambassador for Weight Watchers. She published memoirs, and every time that she would be kind of exposed for doing something vile or sketchy, she would reinvent herself, go on Oprah or some other show in the US and talk about how she changed and she learned her lesson and she was back. While of course people have always claimed Andrew was greedy and always wanted to enrich himself financially, a lot of his motivation also came from his wife's want for money and the finer things that he couldn't supply any other way than doing these sketchy things. And his wife also got herself into considerable debt, and that would motivate her to do these ludicrous things that would embarrass the royal family. And she was so disliked by the royal family that she was pretty much banished by them and not allowed to come to any sort of events and even private things too. Prince Philip was said to detest her so much that he was one of the people instrumental in saying she wasn't stepping foot at any sort of royal thing. And she wasn't even invited to William and Kate's wedding or Meghan and Harry's wedding. She was completely removed from everything basically royal from 2010 onwards. But this wasn't because of Epstein. Like, it absolutely wasn't because of Epstein. It mainly started because she was exposed for selling her royal access. The paper that I mentioned earlier, the News of the World, they actually set her up in a sting to expose how she was selling her access to the royals. There was an undercover reporter who posed as a businessman and offered her £500,000, which is at the time like $720,000, and he gave her $40,000 cash as a down payment. And with this acceptance of cash, she promised to open doors into the royal family and introduce this businessman to Andrew, and they got this all on tape.
£500,000 when you can, to me, open doors.
New Prince Andrew.
Yeah.
Is that a deal?
Yeah.
So this 2019 interview, it was a massive, massive interview. It went viral in every sense of the word. It has won so many awards. It won Interview of the Year when it came out in 2019. And it absolutely was what prompted some sort of action to be taken in regards to Andrew and his royal life. It's also had numerous media pieces created from it. There was a TV series called A Very Royal Scandal that stars Michael Sheen as Andrew and Ruth Wilson as Emily Maitlis. And Ruth Wilson is fantastic in it. She gets Emily's voice like dead on, and she has like quite a unique voice. So it's really great performance.
Do you regret any of your behaviour or your friendship with Epstein?
Now, still not.
There also was Scoop, which was a film on Netflix starring Gillian Anderson as Emily and Billy Piper as Sam McAllister, who was the booker for BBC Newsnight.
You're chasing a story that we're never going to get.
This is the work.
Sam McAllister was the person involved with Scoop. They actually ended up basing it on her book. And in Scoop, Gillian Anderson plays the part of Emily Maitlis, and she does a great job at the voice as well. But obviously, she's also a fantastic actress.
Wouldn't have seen that in a BBC studio when I started.
And Emily Maitlis, who was the interviewer, the BBC interviewer, she ended up being an executive producer and consultant on the TV series A Very Royal Scandal. So Emily Maitlis and Sam McAllister, yes, they had very successful careers before, but they've almost been able to have a career out of this interview because it was so successful. But what I'm going to tell you now wasn't in the movie, it wasn't in the TV show, it wasn't in any of the award acceptance speeches, it wasn't submitted to the BAFTAs, and it really isn't anywhere. It's not in the mainstream media. It's very hard to find and very hard to even learn about. But it's also not in any way to diminish the interview. It was an exceptional interview that resulted in an unprecedented situation with the royals and a blood prince of the Queen being reprimanded, which was not something anyone thought would happen. But there is more to this story, and a very, very unsung hero that in no way has got the accolades that they deserve for their involvement in this piece. The interview took place in November 2019, and there was ongoing work to get this interview for Newsnight with Andrew, but previously it was supposed to be about Pitch at the Palace, which we just talked about. In the TV show and the movies, they show this whole story of months of work and going back and forth and pushing and researching, and that allegedly is not true.
That is the public story, and several journalists enhanced their careers as a result of that version, with books and dramas. The reality is rather different.
The Newsnight team only knew about this Epstein interview 72 hours before the interview would take place. 3 months earlier, in August 2019, a team at Panorama in Northern Ireland had approached the palace for a right of reply, which we also mentioned earlier, as they had done an extensive investigation into Andrew. The Panorama team, the main person of which was producer Laura Burns, had spent an exhaustive amount of time and energy investigating all of the allegations against Andrew.
The BBC had long been investigating Prince Andrew's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, not in London, but Northern Ireland, and the key figure was not Emily Maitlis or Sam McAllister, but a BBC producer called Laura Burns.
She had gone to America to speak to Virginia Giuffre and many other victims. She had gone literally door to door asking about Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, about Andrew, and she spoke to people that had never been spoke to before. They they had an astonishing amount of information. At the time, Amanda Thirst, Andrew's private secretary, was pushing for an in-person interview for Andrew to address all of the allegations, and it was decided by Thirst and the palace that it would be much better to have an hour-long sit-down with Newsnight on the BBC, where Andrew would have an hour to put across his case and be the Queen of the Sun sitting there talking about this. They thought that would win people over. They didn't want the Panorama team to have an hour-long piece going over all of the sordid details and allegations.
How the interview moved from Panorama to Newsnight is debatable, but the suspicion remains that the palace preferred a straight interview to a right of reply after a hard-hitting investigation. Contrary to the narrative that has been presented, Newsnight, which had only previously discussed an interview to promote Pitch at Palace, had just 72 hours' notice of what would prove a seminal television event.
And so Laura and her team were told the BBC would be doing the interview, and they were to turn over everything, all of their research, to the BBC.
4 days later, Burns learned that Andrew was not doing an interview with them, but with Newsnight, and that her months of research had to be passed to the Newsnight team.
Laura Burns, her assistant producer Olivia Davis, and their team wanted to see Andrew held to account. Laura Burns has said that she knew, because of who Andrew was and this delusional world he lived in, she knew that an interview would be TV gold and would blow up in his face. And so, because the Panorama team cared about the story and the victims, even though it wouldn't be them who would be holding Andrew to account, nor them who would get the praise or accolades or income generated from these interviews, they not only allegedly turned over all of their research, but they went on to collaborate and massively help the Newsnight team. And allegedly, a large amount of the pressure points in the interview and the stories and the questions were with the assistance of Laura Burns. Allegedly, Laura Burns also helped them fact check their questions, provided them with timelines, shared her and her team's script, shared legal documents, and every shred of months and months of research.
Working for the Northern Ireland Panorama office, Burns and assistant producer Olivia Davis had travelled widely in the United States, checking police reports, interviewing Epstein's staff, tracing victims of both him and Prince Andrew, and persuading Virginia Giffray and her legal team to be interviewed on camera. In Burns's words, the team also found personal email discussions between Ghislaine and Andrew discussing Virginia. The emails between Ghislaine and Andrew didn't exclaim, "It's a fake, I've never met her," or any other questions. Instead, they worked together to build a dossier about Virginia to leak to the media. The investigations were not without problems. The women were followed by private investigators and had the police called on them.
Laura Burns also provided all of the information and research she'd done looking into the infamous photo to be confirmed as real, as this was when Andrew had started saying this photo was a fake.
It was Burns who was required to prepare them. She fact-checked their video insert, shared Panorama's script, research contacts, legal documents, and detailed timelines, fact-checked their questions, and wrote some of the most significant questions of her own.
Despite all of this, Laura Burns' name was removed as a producer, and her name was also omitted from the BAFTA submissions.
Burns also checked the veracity of the photograph of him with Virginia Giffray, and shared all of that information freely with the Newsnight team. It was a positive story of collaboration with historically rival departments, Panorama and Newsnight, working together to hold power to account and to get the prince's answers on record. Unfortunately, that was where the collaboration ended. Burns's credit was removed from the interview broadcast. There was no mention of her crucial role in the BAFTA submission, in the press, or in any of the subsequent books or films. The single mother who had made the interview coup possible had been written out of the script.
I think there are bits and pieces in the TV show where, when you know this story, you can kind of piece together where they've skirted around it in the TV show. And Emily Maitlis has a podcast now called News Agents, and when the author of Entitled, Andrew Lowry, was on News Agents, Emily Maitlis wasn't there. It was her co-host, and he was very aggressive with the questions because Andrew Lowry has been really the only person in the mainstream media or any sort of mainstream publishing that has told this story. And it is, again, when you know this story and you watch the interview, it is very interesting. Could Emily Maitlis have been on vacation or been ill? Absolutely. But it does just seem kind of suspicious. I'm going to show you this clip, but just to note, this is the first question. This is the opening seconds of this interview.
I've read the book and I'm struck by the efforts you went to and the detail you got on the finances, where some of the money was coming from, some of the dodgy dealing that you uncovered, but also how much you failed to uncover. Why couldn't you get to the truth of it?
Well, I agree. This is the tip of the iceberg. And I've only uncovered things that were perhaps reported in the press or were legal cases where things emerged, or legal depositions. I mean, if we hadn't had Virginia Giuffre, quite a lot of the stuff wouldn't have happened.
Again, I'm not saying they didn't do amazing work with this interview. I just think it's very sad that someone who did so much work, Laura Burns and her team, didn't get even a mention. As I said, the only place I found this story is in Andrew Lowry's book entitled, and also outside of the British media, mainly the Irish media. The main kind of BBC equivalent, or like the Irish main news source, is RTE, which is Radio Televis Éireann, which is in Irish basically translated to Radio Television Ireland. And there's stories about it on RTE, but if you look it up, it's very sparse, the information. After the interview was conducted, Andrew thought it had gone extremely well. So much so, he gave the BBC a tour of the palace and even invited them to stay and watch Titanic for this movie night that they do for the palace staff. The interview was filmed on a Thursday and they ended up airing it on a Saturday night. But before the airing on the Saturday night, the BBC released the transcripts to select journalists who started discussing it on social media and saying what an absolute disaster this was going to be. Of course, they were all embargoed, so it was just general things like that. They couldn't go into specifics, but this did drum up even more hype, because even just the fact that he was sitting down to discuss the Epstein allegations as the son of the Queen, I mean, it was unprecedented. One other person read the transcripts before the interview aired, and that was the Queen. And when the Queen read the transcripts, that's when she couldn't ignore this any longer. And Andrew, who was so confident that this was going to go fine, had actually gone on a shooting weekend on the Friday and was supposed to be gone to the Sunday. It's been said by people who attended the shooting weekend that on the Saturday lunchtime, Andrew received a tap on the shoulder and was summoned by the Queen, and he didn't return to the rest of the shooting weekend. This is portrayed a little bit differently in the TV show and movies, but he ends up then being told, you cannot basically be a part of public royal life any longer.
Plane crashing into an oil tanker, causing a tsunami kind of bad.
The interview then aired around the world, and people saw Andrew for an hour give the most nonsensical answers and justifications for his behavior and friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, which he said he did not regret.
It's widely being described now as Prince Andrew's disastrous BBC interview. It's almost like he was pressing a self-destruct button.
He claimed he'd never met Virginia Giuffre, that he'd never been upstairs in Ghislaine Maxwell's house, despite the fact that there was a picture of him upstairs in Ghislaine Maxwell's house with Virginia Giuffre. Of course, this is back, this picture was taken like back before iPhones and all of that, and it was taken on a disposable camera that Virginia had on March 10th, 2001. And there have been many different avenues that this has been looked into over the years, and people who saw it long before it was published. And they were even able to trace that this picture was published at a Walgreens 2 miles away from Epstein's house in Florida, and it was printed on March 13th, 2001. Virginia had shown it to other people, like the reporter that I mentioned earlier, before the stories came out. But sometime between that and the interview, basically in 2019, the original had been not misplaced, but she just wasn't sure where it was because she'd moved from Australia and had moved other various times. So she wasn't able to produce the original that they kept asking for, although she had lent the original and other pictures to the FBI in 2011, and the FBI had made all these copies of the pictures. And when the FBI went back to look at the originals, to look at the front and back, the one picture of the FBI's copy that was missing was the one of Andrew, but obviously Virginia had tons of other copies. In the interview, Andrew also goes on to make ludicrous claims about Virginia's account of this night, that Andrew didn't meet her. He said that Virginia talked about him profusely sweating, and he said that he couldn't sweat because of an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War, which, all my experience in the medical industry, I've never heard of that. And I, over the years since this interview, have brought this subject up, or it's come up with dozens of doctors, and I've asked so many of them specifically about this claim and if it was something that I didn't know or was a gap in my knowledge. And many of them specialists, one of them has been a specialist for 50 years, and none of them have ever heard of this peculiar medical condition either. Andrew also said that due to all the opportunities with Epstein and all of the people he was able to meet, no, he didn't regret his friendship with Epstein. If you haven't watched this interview, I've linked it below, and I really implore you to watch it. It's insane, but also the result of someone just so deluded by their own self-importance. He never has been told no or questioned about anything. He's had no consequences of his actions. He just thought he was so brilliant that he could sit down for an hour and people would just swallow whatever he said. Of course, the interview blew up in his face, and instead of squashing the allegations, he had poured gasoline onto the allegations, and it just went nuts online, in the media, everywhere. After the interview, it kicked up so much anger with the public that the palace did start to panic. Andrew stepped back from royal life, and he wasn't going to be publicly using his titles like HRH or Prince or Duke of York, which he did retain them privately for a while, but that has recently changed. The public were still very angry, and Virginia then filed a lawsuit with her lawyer, David Boyce, who is the true definition of grey, because he has represented people like Virginia, but then also represented people like Harvey Weinstein and original OG of the channel, Elizabeth Holmes, and her company Theranos. Boyce was actually very involved with Theranos and was on their board, and I am the original Elizabeth Holmes hater because I have been following that lunatic for 20 years, and I have a massive deep dive on her and some other videos when she was going through her trial, and I really want to do an update on her because she is like on Twitter being absolutely unhinged from prison. And just to tie it all in, because as I always say, all these people always fucking know each other, even when they're in prison. Elizabeth Holmes, while she's been in prison, has been besties with Ghislaine fucking Maxwell. By 2022, there was still so much attention surrounding this Andrew situation, and it was going to be the Queen's 70th year on the throne. It was going to be a massive celebration for her Platinum Jubilee. So Andrew ended up being forced to settle the case with Virginia, with the stipulation that the amount wouldn't be disclosed, although it is reported to be 10 million. Some places report it as 12, but most places that I've read that I trust the sources more, it seems to be 10 million. And the other sort of key stipulations were that Virginia wasn't allowed to discuss anything. She was kind of gagged for the year of the Platinum Jubilee 2022. It's also reported that various members of the royal family assisted Andrew with this settlement. Some places report the Queen, some report King Charles, and a lot of the money, apparently some came from this ski chalet. They ended up selling this $18 million ski chalet. Of course, also in 2022, the Queen passed away as the longest reigning monarch in British history. Andrew was allowed to attend the funeral because, of course, it's his mother, and he was actually heckled at the funeral.
Powerful men should be allowed to commit sexual crimes and get away with it.
He wasn't allowed to wear his uniform though, and instead wore just like a plain morning suit. Pressure continued even after the Queen's passing, and more information came out about Andrew and Epstein. And also at the same time, Virginia was working on her memoir, which the palace knew and obviously knew all of this wasn't going away. Very sadly, this year, Virginia was in a very serious car accident, and in April this year, she ended up taking her own life. Her book has been published as of last month. She worked on that with like a ghostwriter, and as I mentioned, Andrew Lowry, his book was just published about a month before Virginia. So this kind of back-to-back publishing of all of this information, and the public still being so angry about the situation. King Charles actually did something against his brother that was very unprecedented, and a lot of people didn't think this would happen, but most people have heard that King Charles has wanted to do this for a long time, and this action has also kind of prompted some questions. In early October 2025, Andrew did give up his remaining royal titles, including the Duke of York, but on October 30th, a very shocking statement came from Buckingham Palace. The statement read, "As of today, the King has initiated a formal process to remove the styles, titles, and honours of Prince Andrew. Formal notice has been served to surrender the lease on Royal Lodge," which is where he lived, and he did have a 75-year lease, so a lot of people thought that he wouldn't be able to do that. He will be moved to a private accommodation in Sandringham Estate, which is understood to be privately funded by King Charles. The statement then went on to say, "These censures are deemed necessary, notwithstanding the fact that he continues to deny the allegations against him." And the statement ended with a note that apparently Camilla, the Queen Consort, added that said that the palace and the King and Queen stood with any victims of any form of abuse. Around this time, too, is when the further emails came out showing that Andrew was still in contact with Epstein after he said he was. And there was also emails from Sarah Ferguson to Epstein apologizing for when she had gone on Oprah and distanced herself from Epstein. And in the email, she goes on to again apologize and call him a supreme friend. There were other emails released that showed Andrew sending Virginia Giuffre's date of birth and social security number to royal protection officers in hopes of digging up an arrest record on Virginia, which she didn't have an arrest record. And Andrew also wanted other materials dug up, which most people believe this email was to try and orchestrate some sort of smear campaign against Virginia. And there's also suggestion that he was implementing the services of companies for troll and bot accounts to go against Virginia. Andrew has 1 year to leave Royal Lodge, and I'm honestly not convinced that he will go to Sandringham. We'll have to say, but he is still technically a prince and a prince by blood, and he'll still be funded, and they can't really cut them completely loose because the palace and the royals live in fear of being exposed and the media, and the last thing they want is another spare by Prince Harry. So I think that they also live in fear of Sarah Ferguson just telling it all. So we'll have to see how they try and kick them out, but still keep them towing the line. Hi guys, Editing Ash here. Just before we get into our Prince Harry stories, just wanted to jump in because I forgot to kind of go into a little bit more detail about the HRH, because it will very much sting Andrew that this has been removed now, because if you aren't an HRH, there's a lot of little things that you have to do that he is going to have to do now that he isn't anymore. So I am recording this for like the fourth time because I went too deep, because the royals and like history and stuff is a hyperfixation. I've read so much about this stuff that I could talk about George V's 1917 letter patents that all of this stuff comes from, but I will save that for another day for you. But basically, HRH it's not actually a title like prince or princess, it's a style. And so it is, in the most basic of terms, the style for the most senior members of the royal family. And the people who usually have it are the monarch, obviously, and usually they give it to the spouses of the HRHs on their wedding day, because otherwise the spouse would have to do the whole faff thing that I'm going to explain here. So then it's the kids of the monarch have it as well, and the male line grandchildren of the monarch, which is why when Charles became king, Harry and Meghan's kids automatically became prince and princess and became HRHs. So usually you can, if you're not a working member of the royal family, I don't know why you would have it. And I know I think Harry and Meghan talked about it in maybe it was the Oprah interview. It was one of them. Maybe it was a Netflix, or maybe both actually. But they talked about how the kids weren't. And it's all to do with this letter patent by George V, who was the Queen's grandfather. And there's a whole saga. Like, the Queen was never supposed to be an heir. She was never supposed to be queen. The last two Duke of Yorks became king, just one through death and one through the abdication. So imagine if it was 3 for 3 with Andrew. And I did actually cut this out, but Sarah Ferguson has spent an obscene amount of money on psychics and is like super into them. And psychics have told her many things over the years, but one of them, like in, I think like the early 90s, told her that Charles was going to die in an avalanche and Andrew was going to be made regent while William was still under 18, which is kind of like you're helping rule while the heir is a child. And there was actually an avalanche that Charles and Diana were involved in, and people in their party died. So after that happened, Sarah Ferguson got like even deeper with the psychics. But as I always say, and it's night when I'm doing these, my ADHD meds have worn off. So back to the HRHs. So the HRH, like I said, those are the people that have it. And when you do not have it, or when you're just not an HRH, if I went into a room and there are HRHs there, I have to go in and say, Your Royal Highness. If it's a man, after you say it once, I mean, you can continue to say it, but you would say, sir. And then when you're leaving, you'll usually say it again. With a woman, you'll usually say, ma'am, as in ham. Same thing. Say it the first time, last time. That, like, when you see royals being interviewed, the interviewer will usually do that. And then when you come in, I'm a woman, so I would curtsy, men, bow, and the fact that Andrew isn't an HRH anymore. So if you are an HRH, when you go in, like when Harry goes in to William, he doesn't have to do all this faff. If they go into Charles, like they do because he's king, and I mean, they do all this shit, even when it's just them. William and Harry are a lot more like relaxed about it and stuff. Like I said, I have friends that have been like friends with Harry in particular, and he's not making his friends come in and like bow to him. Andrew does, though, when he will be like on, I don't know, like a shooting weekend with people, and he comes down in the morning. If they don't stand up and Your Royal Highness and bow and curtsy and stuff, he will leave the room and be like, let's try this again. So some of them, they care about all this stuff. But the fact that Andrew isn't one anymore, he has to do it all. So when he goes into a room and William is there, or Kate's there, or his own daughters are there, he has to do all of that. He has to go in and bow to his own daughters and all this. And even like all of them will have always done that to the Queen. If they go into a room and they're, I don't know, they're seeing the Queen, they haven't seen her that day, and it's just them, they will do that. He wasn't using the HRH up until now, but I'm sure he was using it in private because it wasn't taken away until, that happened on the 30th of October. So I'm sure that really, really stings him that he has to go in and do that whole faff to his daughters and nieces and nephews and everything like that. This is like unprecedented that they are taking this stuff away. And even the house and stuff, like before they'd be like, oh no, it's an ironclad lease and stuff. So it is a really big deal. And either there's something coming down the line and they're getting ahead of it, or Charles is a lot sicker than we're being led to believe. And William, he doesn't want to leave William with this mess of Andrew, because the word has always been that William does not have any time for Andrew. We'll have to see what happens there. That's kind of what I'm thinking. It could also be to the point where they're just so sick of dealing with it. I think that there will be a lot more shakeups in the monarchy to come, and like I said, I do have a super big interest in all this stuff, so I'd love any excuse to talk about it again, but I will try and wrap it up now and send it back to past me. I will tell you a very harmless, I think, story about Prince Harry. This is something he's telling me like at dinner, so it wasn't exactly like tell me the exact date and everything that this happened. And it does kind of show you that like the royals are always looming at what is going on, and they are fully apprised, as all of the people that are around the royals, and they have MI5 and MI6 telling them information. Like it's so difficult to believe that Andrew knew nothing about, even if you do believe that he never saw anything with Epstein, which also, but him saying he didn't know about these arrests and all of that, it's just very difficult to believe. But obviously people can make their own decision. With Prince Harry and this friend, and it's like a big group of friends, they were in Australia and they'd been at some sort of event or something, that they were all in like suit jackets, and they're driving in Australia in like some sort of Jeep, and they end up at night and they end up hitting a kangaroo, and for some reason, thinking the kangaroo was dead, they dressed the kangaroo up in one of their like suit jackets, and the kangaroo had just been kind of like hit and knocked unconscious. This sounds ludicrous, I know. And the kangaroo then pops up, not dead, and hops away with the full suit on. And whenever they see the kangaroo going away, they realize that the kangaroo, the jacket that was on it, had the car keys in it, and they had to call in like the Royal Protection Squad basically to save them. And there's also been stories over the years about Princess Beatrice and Eugenie using a lot of their Royal Protection Squad, because when they were younger and going out and getting drunk and things, this is before Uber, as basically designated drivers to drive them home from going out and being pissed. And that's what taxpayers are paying for, apparently. And as I said, there are a plethora of other stories with the royals, but just speaking to people that have had close relationships with the royals, as I said, the things that they've gone through over the years about having pictures deleted and being sat down after certain situations and being told, you do not tell anyone about this. Like it's very, very orchestrated. And that's why Prince Andrew, it just does seem like he was allowed to do whatever he wanted, and there were absolutely no repercussions, because it's astonishing, all of this story, but also how long he was able to get away with this, and how close Epstein was at like the daughter's birthday. And there's also pictures of Ghislaine Maxwell and Kevin Spacey on the thrones at the palace, and apparently Ghislaine Maxwell like showing other people around. And I went to an immediate family member's wedding at Hillsborough Castle, which is the Queen's residence in Northern Ireland. I don't want to get into this wedding, but the thrones are there. Obviously, I'll put pictures in. You can't just go up and sit on the thrones. Like, it is absolutely not allowed, even at 3 a.m. when I don't drink, but everybody else was pissed and walking around. It's just not allowed. And they have people around and stuff. And we were upstairs in the castle and everything. Ghislaine Maxwell and Kevin Spacey, like, either they felt so confident and so brazen that they were with Andrew that they could do that, or he will have been like, yeah, go sit on them, take a picture. I'll show you. There's pictures of people in my family like standing in front of them, pointing at them. You don't sit in them. So the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was close enough to Andrew, or whatever the arrangement was, that happened, that is pretty significant. There is so much more I want to say about Andrew and Fergie and the royals in general. The royals are kind of a little hyper fixation subject that I'm always fascinated by. So I would love to do more videos on them, other videos. So please let me know down below if you would like to see any of that. If not, I'll probably make it some options on my Patreon monthly topic poll. As I said, there is more information being released on Epstein, and that should be coming in the next few days. Hopefully, we'll see what this gleans and the situation with what Maxwell's released too. So that has literally just happened as I was filming, that she's released something that it seems like it's either trying to distract or trying to halt something or put a pause. So we'll have to see either way, if it comes out, when it does come out, what's in there. But hopefully we'll be able to cover it in some way. My prediction is there will be a lot more in whatever is released with Epstein and Sarah Ferguson and Andrew. And I'm not 100% Andrew will go to Sandringham. I think the other option is he could go to the Middle East or somewhere if he really does get concerned, because they have said they are going to look into him trying to orchestrate this smear campaign, but we'll have to see. All of that sounds pretty insane and unprecedented, but look what's happened already. We might be outside Buckingham Palace today, but in today's video, we're going to be going inside Buckingham Palace, and I'm going to be sharing with you never seen before pictures of inside former Prince Andrew's former apartment at Buckingham Palace. And for anyone who knows about the infamous teddy bears, yes, there's lots of teddy bears. I'm also going to be sharing with you never heard behind the scenes stories from former palace staff, including former staff of the late Queen and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor. And probably most interesting of all, I'm going to be sharing with you what exactly King Charles said to his brother after that horrendous Newsnight interview in 2019. As almost everyone, if not everyone watching this video will be aware, last Thursday on February 19th, 2026, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor was arrested at the Sandringham estate in England. Andrew, of course, is the son of the late Queen and the brother of the King, and it's pretty unprecedented that a member of the British royal family would be arrested, never mind a senior member of the British royal family. And it's been well over 300 years since the last time a member of the British royal family was arrested, and that was King Charles, who ended up losing his head over his arrest. Andrew being arrested, although it was a surprise that it happened, this is a long time coming, with the stories about him and Epstein and his accusations of misconduct in public office, his accusations of enriching himself, and of course the accusations surrounding his treatment of young women and girls have been circulating for well over a decade in the mainstream media, and even longer outside of the mainstream media. I'm actually going to show you an article from over 25 years ago that when you read it, is astounding that this was written that long ago, because it lays out a pretty bare bones of what's happened in the last several years. Of course, as I mentioned in the intro, I'm also going to show you some pictures of Andrew's apartment at Buckingham Palace, and I'm also going to share a lot of stories that former palace staff have shared with me. And I also have got information from people who have close relationships and friendships with members of the royal family. I mentioned in my original Andrew video that I did about 2 months ago that I have family members who are very close friends with people who are friends of members of the royal family. And then I also have friends and family members who they wouldn't go as far as saying friends, but they've spent significant time with members of the royal family. And so there's quite a mix of stories, but what I also found so interesting about what a lot of people told me is that there was very consistent stories, whether it was someone who, when you Google who are Prince Harry's best friends, this person comes up. And then a story that was told to me by people who worked as footmen and cleaners at Buckingham Palace, the stories very much matched up. Obviously, there's lots of different details, but there was a very similar through line to all of the stories. And I also will be talking about some aspects and lesser known stories from the whole Andrew Epstein saga that I think are going to start to get more coverage now that Andrew is being investigated and this story is blowing up even bigger than it was before. So as I said, these images are from Andrew's Buckingham Palace apartment, and after we go through the pictures, I'll talk about his old house, Royal Lodge, that he just moved out of a few months ago, because the people that I spoke to and the person who gave me these pictures was in Royal Lodge several times and gave a lot of information about what it was like, and it is very in line with the Buckingham Palace one, just on a more intense and larger scale. Like, you're going to see lots of teddies in this Buckingham Palace apartment. And of course, there's a very famous or infamous story about Andrew and his teddy bears and how they're laid out on his bed. There's over 60, 70 of them, and they all have a spot, like there's a sheet that the maids are supposed to put them all in lined up.
A 40-year-old man with about 50 or 60 teddy bears on his bed. All right, fair enough. And then he said, there's a card in that drawer there, and showed us the card. It was a laminated picture of all the teddy bears. If the teddy bears aren't put back in this certain order, Prince Andrew would start shouting and swearing at the maids.
And actually, the person who took these pictures, when they first went into Royal Lodge, they actually went into Andrew's room and thought it was one of his daughters because of all the teddy bears.
Why would anyone have 50 or 60 teddy bears on their bed?
Well, apparently it was 72. More have come forward. So.
And obviously the Buckingham Palace apartment, it's an apartment, it's a room, a bedroom, and an office and a bathroom. And there is still a lot of teddy bears in this bedroom and all across the apartment. And there's also a ton of these little pillows. I will be putting them on the screen so you can see, but I will leave the pictures in the sources so that, you know, if you want to zoom in and all of that, you can look at them yourself. Because the reason that I wanted to show them, this isn't really something that I would do like for a celebrity or something, like put pictures of their apartment and stuff, but I did think that there is a possibility that these could be helpful to someone. I know that's probably a very, very small chance, but they are currently investigating the accusations that Andrew brought a lot of women to Buckingham Palace. There have been a lot of the former royal protection officers, especially one called Paul Page, who's spoken about the absolute revolving door of women coming in to Buckingham Palace, and Andrew never wanting to give their name. He would absolutely blow up at the royal protection officers when they would try and get the name from these women, because it's Buckingham Palace. It's one of the most protected places in the world. Anybody could go up and say, oh, I've got an appointment with Andrew or an appointment with the Queen. They do extensive security checks. And even the former palace staff that I spoke to, they said that they didn't believe there was any way that the palace didn't know all of the people that were coming in. I mean, that even just sounds obvious, but especially with Epstein and after his arrest and things like when Epstein, Weinstein, and Maxwell went to Andrew's daughter's 18th birthday, the palace staff told me that when they were getting the job, not only were they looked into, but their entire family was. And there was one staff member who told me they got the job, but they almost didn't end up doing the job because their background check took months and months and months, and they almost weren't able to go through with it because it took so long to check all their family and stuff like that. And I did actually see there was a story in The Guardian about 20 years ago where a journalist had actually got hired as a footman, and he worked there for 2 months, and he ended up writing this article that described all of these apartments and what it was like in the palace and how all of the royals were. And what's so funny is that that story is 20 years old, and he explains about Andrew's apartment, and he mentions this one specific pillow that says you gotta kiss a lot of frogs to get to your prince. And that pillow is in these pictures that I'm showing you. And there's loads of other prince pillows and like very, I mean, cringe is probably the best word for it, because really, like, it just seems kind of sickening. But obviously for the audio only listeners, I will describe some of them as best I can. And on his bed, he does have more of these like prince pillows. The one on the bed says, "It's not easy being a prince." And as you'll see, there's loads of teddy bears, like about 10 on the bed, because there's like one with like a pillow and a bunch of them on. And as I said, there are loads of teddies like throughout the rest of the room. There's 3 or 4 on his desk, and there's loads on a sofa next to the bed. There's probably 15 or more in the bedroom. And one of the staff members from the palace told me that the whole thing, like, as I said, this staff member was in Royal Lodge several times, saw the bed with all the teddy bears, but they told me a story about when Andrew was on one of these trips, and he has this teddy bear. It's just like looks like a regular little bear. The Queen actually gave it to him when he's a child, and I'll show you on the screen. There's a picture of him as a child with the bear in a frame in the Buckingham Palace apartment. And when he was on one of these trips, he like sleeps with this bear, he ended up thinking he lost the bear or left it there, where I can't remember where, or maybe they didn't even say where it was, but they were on this trip. And when he thought he'd lost the bear, he said to his valet, "You made me lose my bear that my mum gave me, and I can't sleep without it." And he told the staff member, "You need to go back, pay your own way to go back and get the teddy bear and bring it back here, because I can't sleep or live without it." And they did end up finding it, but he, according to a lot of the staff members, has this very bizarre attachment to these teddy bears, and also he uses them to display his feelings. Like when he was having to move out of Royal Lodge and things, there were people saying that he was talking about how it was going to be difficult for the teddy bears, and there's lots of odd things through with these bears, and just very, very strange stories about sleeping with them and having this close relationship with all these teddy bears. As you'll also see in the pictures that I'm showing you, there are unbelievable amounts of pictures of Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, and even just pictures of Sarah Ferguson. There's a few pictures of the Queen and Prince Philip. There's one of the Queen Mother. There's several of the daughters, but there's no one pictured more than Sarah Ferguson. And you might think, oh, maybe these pictures have been up for ages and they just haven't been changed. These pictures were taken. I don't want to be too specific with dates, and there's also certain things like stories about Prince Philip maybe using people's heritage or country of origin to make jokes. I don't want to say anything like specific, because I think that would make it not obvious who told me these things, but it would maybe narrow it down. So but these pictures were taken. Obviously, he hasn't apparently had this apartment at Buckingham Palace. I believe he got chucked out of it in 2022, but these pictures were taken only a few years before that. These are pretty recent. These are after the 2019 Emily Maitlis interview. Maybe you could say that. Maybe you could say, even though Fergie and Andrew broke up in 1992 and did actually get on paper divorced in 1996, maybe they've just left those pictures because a lot of them aren't recent pictures. But whenever I spoke to the staff member who gave me these pictures, they told me that in Royal Lodge, which Andrew and Sarah Ferguson moved into in 2004, despite being divorced for almost 10 years and being separated for 12, the house at Royal Lodge is even worse than the Buckingham Palace one. The same way the teddy bears are intensified at Royal Lodge, the pictures of Sarah Ferguson and Andrew were intensified at Royal Lodge. And when you walked in, there was these massive, massive portraits of the two of them. And there's just pictures throughout, especially of Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. And yeah, there's some of the daughters, but it's mostly the two of them, which I don't think would be surprising to hear for a lot of people who know a lot about Andrew and this whole story. As I said, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson moved into Royal Lodge in 2004. Previously, that house was where the Queen Mother lived. And prior to moving into Royal Lodge, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were living in a place called Sunninghill, which was given to them on their wedding by the Queen. This was a huge, massive house with loads of things like swimming pools and tennis courts. And they ended up selling that house obviously when they were going to move into Royal Lodge. I believe Sarah Ferguson lived there with the daughters for another year, maybe two, and then she moved into Royal Lodge, and her and Andrew lived at Royal Lodge for 20 years together, even though they've been divorced for 30 years nearly. And Andrew and Sarah Ferguson both were essentially evicted from Royal Lodge a few months ago at the end of 2025. And it actually hasn't been known where Sarah Ferguson is, but just the day before I'm filming this like super early on Monday the 23rd, Sarah Ferguson has apparently been found, and she's staying at this Swiss sort of center that is almost $20,000 a night. It's about £14,000. And you actually go there for clearing your mind and working on yourself and all of this. And she's been there before, but she didn't pay before because she did some sort of promotion for the center.
To thank you in deep gratitude for giving me a safe harbour in the storms of life.
Editing Ash and Editing G here with a very quick Sarah Ferguson update. She apparently has now left this Swiss relaxation clinic, get your head showered place. So she has allegedly moved on to hiding out in the UAE. There's been a lot of reports that she's been hiding in Dubai. By reports, I mean a lot of people like Andrew Lowney, who has sources upon sources, and people that are friends with her and very close to her, and also people like Tom Sykes, who goes by the Royalist on YouTube. He has quite a lot of connections and sources in, and he's been a royal reporter for a very long time. He used to work at the Daily Beast and lots of other publications. He's also reported this similar story that Sarah Ferguson is hiding out in the UAE. And there's obviously a lot of reasons that she'll have gone there. I mean, one mainly will be that she is still treated extremely well, treated like royalty there. She'll be put up in palaces, and Andrew apparently has a palace fully staffed at his beck and call there. She has a lot of, or has had a lot of like business ties and financial ties and things there. And I also think something that would have been a big tick in the plus column is the fact that, and I talked about this in my Lindsay Lohan video, that paparazzi isn't a thing there because it's not allowed. So you're not really going to run the risk of getting paparazzied. And for her right now, that's a massive appeal, because I think the only way we would see any pictures of her would be like, I don't know if like a British person was on vacation there or something and took a picture of her. And we'll have to see what happens with her, because by all accounts, from everything I've heard and read, she is pretty much in hiding, but she's also run out of money, so we'll have to see when and where she reemerges next. I know, an editing ash within an editing ash, but you know I'm always doing research up until the last second, so there's been an update about Sarah Ferguson, and what I said was true. She was in the Middle East, she was in this 20 grand a night Swiss treatment center, but apparently that wasn't enough, because now she's in another treatment center, wellness clinic, get your head showered place, and she is in Ireland. She's in Donegal, which, my poor homeland. She actually went to this treatment center, I believe, last summer, and I'll put a picture on the screen. She did some promotion stuff and did like pictures and videos and things when she was on the beach in Donegal, and she's been there for at least a few days. This information only came out yesterday, February the 26th, Friday, February the 27th. I plan on posting this today, and the information, there was one little mention that she was spotted at the Donegal airport, and it's a really small airport. But I believe where the papers, because it was in the Daily Mail yesterday, got this information was from Andrew Lowney, who ended up talking about it late last night on his YouTube channel. And he kind of does like a lot of these question and answer and discussions with this other YouTube channel that's called Throwing the Book at Them. And Andrew Lowney's YouTube channel is The Lowney Report. So again, I'll, of course, like everything with the sources, leave all these linked down below. And I saw this like really late last night because I watched it pretty much straight away when it came out. And I was like, oh God, to do another editing section. But basically, Andrew Lowney, in this discussion that he had last night, said that he actually got the information from a source and then he leaked the story to the papers. I just wanted to put that update out there, because if I didn't, I'm sure when I posted this video, someone might be like, well, there's a story in the Daily Mail today that she's in Donegal, so she might be somewhere else next week. You know, there's plenty of wellness treatment centers around the world, plenty of expensive treatment centers around the world that she apparently is going to be doing a tour of. So we'll have to wait and see where she shows up next. And I will talk more about Sarah Ferguson and her spending and a lot of the financial aspects, because if you look at the emails where Andrew is alleged to have committed this misconduct in public office, there's actually the emails where he sends Epstein this classified information that he's got when he's a trade envoy, and there's further emails on that chain where Andrew is talking about this man, Johnny O'Sullivan, who worked for Sarah Ferguson. And obviously this is my interpretation, but from the email chain, it seems as though Andrew sends this classified information to Epstein, and then there is a payment sent to Johnny O'Sullivan from Epstein, and there's even like the bank documents and stuff, because when all this was happening, Sarah Ferguson was in massive amounts of debt, and she has been in massive amounts of debt over many years, but Epstein had paid a lot of Sarah Ferguson's debts before, and there has been reports by Sarah Ferguson herself saying he paid $15,000. But Andrew Lowney, who wrote the book entitled The Rise and Fall of the House of York, which is a fantastic book, and I would have it behind here, but I just lent it to my cousin. So I really recommend that book if you want to know everything about this story. I talked more about it in the original Andrew video that I did, but Andrew Lowney said that his sources have told him it was more like $2 million that Epstein ended up paying for Sarah Ferguson. And the fact that there is this back and forth in these emails when Andrew is sending this information to Epstein, it very much looks like it's some sort of trade. And right around the time that these emails that is alleged to have been misconduct in public office, that's happening the month before Andrew goes to New York to see Epstein and, according to him, break off the friendship with Epstein. And he, of course, discussed that in the 2019 Newsnight interview with Emily Maitlis. But we, of course, know now that he didn't, well, we knew then because he seemed to be lying, but he didn't break off the friendship with Epstein. And of course, it even sounded ridiculous then because he said, yes, I'm going to break up this friendship with this convicted pedo, but I had to go to New York and stay for 10 days to do it. And the convicted pedo also threw a party in my honor and invited people like Katie Couric over. And there's also allegations about Andrew's time at Epstein's apartment in 2010, where there were apparently women being brought to him at the apartment. And when they took those very infamous pictures of Epstein and Andrew in Central Park, there's actually video footage from the people who were taking like the pictures and like following the story of Andrew opening the door to Epstein's apartment. And sometimes you'll see young women coming in and out, and also Epstein leaving with young women too. And so a lot of that lines up with the stories that do now seem to be coming out about this time, that Andrew says he was going to break up the friendship, but it seemed like he was going to have, one, his usual party time with Epstein, but also there's lots of reports that Andrew went to ask for more money for Sarah Ferguson, and certainly these emails that we're seeing now do line up with all of that. In Andrew Loney's book entitled "There Are So Many Stories About Andrew's Time as a Trade Envoy and All of the Ways That He Allegedly Enriched Himself," there are so many stories about him doing things in the Middle East, places like Kazakhstan, and there's constantly more and more information coming out, especially during Andrew's time as a trade envoy from 2001 to 2011. And the only reason he was taken out of the role in 2011 was because of everything with Epstein coming out, because that was after Epstein's conviction. And of course, most people know that was a complete joke, that Epstein was given this sentence in prison, but really he just like slept in the prison a few nights, and the whole thing was him getting off very, very lightly for extremely, extremely heinous crimes against a child.
Jeffrey Epstein went to jail just before 10 this morning. He pleaded guilty. He agreed to serve a total of 18 months in the Palm Beach detention facility, 12 for felony solicitation of and an additional 6 for procuring persons under 18.
And in a similar vein to the financial allegations against Andrew, there's also extensive questions surrounding a lot of the charities that Andrew, Sarah Ferguson, and now even Andrew and Fergie's daughters have been involved in, because a lot of these charities that not only the royals, but there's a lot of celebrities that this happens with as well. I've talked extensively about Ashton Kutcher and his charity Thorn not being what most people think it is, and I do have a video on that. But the whole thing with Andrew and Sarah Ferguson is that a lot of people have spoken about how they would have these charities or be involved in these charities, and yes, on paper they would raise a lot of money, but the money wouldn't really go to anyone or do any good, because Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, all of the money would be hoovered up by them through expenses and travel and things like that. And there's also been questions lately surrounding Andrew and Fergie's daughters, because they do have a very big, expensive PR team, the same way like lots of celebrities do. And you'll see a lot of stories talking about them as innocent victims and about them being the girls. A lot of the like pro-royal publications will call them the girls, even though they're the same age as me and they're in their mid to unfortunately late 30s. And they are, I think, people that a lot more is going to come out about them. Some of the things that I've heard about them behind the scenes is that they are very involved with their parents' finances and that sort of realm of things, because Andrew Loney also has spoken in more so in interviews rather than his book, because he said that the lawyers had him take a lot of the stuff about the princesses out, but I believe he's going to put more about them in his paperback, because a lot of stuff that his lawyers had him take out of the book, like accusations about Peter Mandelson and other things about Andrew, have in the time that he published the book in August, and now so much of that has proven to be true through the Epstein files and other people coming forward. So I do think much more is going to come out about the daughters, and although I do have a lot of sympathy towards them for when they were younger, and there's even emails from Sarah Ferguson, their mother, emailing Jeffrey fucking Epstein and saying things like, oh, I'm just waiting on Eugenie, who's the youngest daughter, coming back from a shagging weekend. And she and Andrew would also take the daughters to see Epstein and Sarah Ferguson's also taken them to Diddy parties and things. But the daughters, very much in their 20s, were also going and seeing Epstein, and Epstein was paying for their travel and everything like that. And now all through their 20s, all through their 30s, they also have allegedly been involved in a lot of financial sketchy areas because they have been doing a lot of things in the Middle East. It seems as though they too are exploiting their royal titles, and royals aren't, I know I have a lot of American viewers, but royals aren't like celebrities. They shouldn't be exploiting their royal titles or enriching themselves through their titles. And that is, I know, a lot of people's issue with Meghan and Harry, that they are not working royals. They're not supposed to be using their titles, and they use it on things like Jam and Netflix and stuff. But I do have a lot more to say about Harry and Meghan and William and Kate. And if this video does okay and people want to see it, I would love to do a video on them because I got a lot of stories about them as well. And one of Harry's very close friends is a good friend of my immediate family members, so I've got lots of stories there too. But Harry and Meghan, yes, they shouldn't be doing it and they're not supposed to be exploiting their titles. But from the other side, you can say, well, Sarah Ferguson and the princesses have been doing that as well. And Sarah Ferguson's been doing it for like 20 years. And there wasn't any sort of admonishment of her exploiting her title, even as a divorced person from the royal family. And there does seem to be a lot of just looking the other way in the royal family, which probably is the understatement of the year, because although Fergie had done all of these things and Andrew had done all of these things 2 years ago, after the Newsnight interview had come out, after all of these accusations have come out about him, and Fergie has done things like selling access to Andrew and just gone around and done the most ridiculous things, and there's all the other financial accusations against them. Charles invited them to Christmas at Sandringham, and they were there just a few years ago at the whole royal coming out of church at Christmas, which is like a huge thing in the UK. You always see the royals coming out of church on Christmas. It's like the whole big picture, and they do like the little walkabout, and there's loads of people that come and will line up and sleep there overnight to be there and greet them and all of that. And that Christmas thing is very much, these are the senior members of the royal family. These are the ones that are in and the people at the forefront. And Andrew and, well, Sarah Ferguson hadn't been at Christmas for the royals for over a decade. And Andrew hadn't been there for years since the interview with Emily Maitlis, but Charles brought him and Sarah Ferguson back in. And I will talk about that a little bit more in a minute, because there seems to be a lot of stories in the press, possibly through Buckingham Palace, trying to push this narrative that the king knew nothing and blame everything on the queen. And I do think there's a lot of blame with the queen and Andrew, but I don't think it was 100% her, and I will talk about some stories in just a second, so just put a pin in that for a minute. The palace and a lot of the pro-palace media publications, things like the newspapers, especially ones like The Telegraph, do seem to be trying to go this route of, we didn't know anything, the royal family didn't know anything, when there is not only extensive stories in other publications over the years that point to Andrew being a disaster and all of these things being known about him, being known that he was doing very, very questionable at best financial dealings, and that he was doing very, very horrendous things with women being brought into the palaces, women in certain other countries when he's going on these trips as a trade envoy, and also there being just this horrendous treatment of palace staff and a lot of people that he would come into contact with. There are so many things over the years that you can point to and say, if you didn't know anything, how did this not raise questions? Because up until recently, Andrew would get a payment from the Queen, from the Crown every year as the son of the Queen. And they do things like the civil list, and there's all these rules and things for, I've talked about this before, about like all the titles and stuff, but also who out of the royals are the senior royals, who gets payment and gets security paid for, and all these things. There's all like rules about all of this, and people who are where they're in the line of succession and everything. So Andrew's was that he would get his security and everything. He would get £250,000. So that's close to between 350 and 400,000, probably closer to 400,000 back, you know, in the 2000s and things. And so he also would get £20,000, which is now like $27,000 in his Navy pension. And so that's what he's supposed to be getting a year. And yes, he has this big mansion that is a peppercorn rent, which basically means he pays like nothing for rent. So how is that what he's supposed to be earning? And yet you see this lifestyle that is just absolutely insane from both him and Sarah Ferguson and their daughters, because Andrew and Sarah Ferguson lived the life. And it's not like, oh, they were living this life that seemed, you know, just above their means and a casual millionaire sort of lifestyle. They were doing things like buying 11-figure ski chalets and houses in Belgravia, and they had just so many staff members. Sarah Ferguson had a present wrapper on staff, and then she had a couple, 2 people, whose job it was to pick up dog shit. There were so many people. When you look in Andrew Loney's book, he goes over a lot of the people they had on staff, and it was so extensive that even just paying the salary of all of those staff, of course, like their private secretaries and stuff are covered by the Crown, but it's absolutely wild. And even when you look at the daughters today, they are married to very wealthy husbands, but the oldest daughter, Beatrice, who's the same age as me, she ended up getting this job at Sony when she was in her 20s, and she was earning £19,500, so like $26,000 a year. And yet one of the newspapers did this story the other day where they went through all of her vacations in the years that she was at Sony. And the first year she was there, she went on 11 vacations. And not only, I mean, the UK gets a hell of a lot more vacation days than the US, let me tell you that. But still, the amount to cover 11 vacations, she probably was taking unpaid leave. So she probably didn't even get 19,500. But the newspaper added up the basic cost, and they very much like erred on the side of caution. Like they underreported the numbers a little bit, I think. And even adding up the 11 vacations, they said that it would total over 350,000. So does that not like raise any flags that even that, because there's also so many things with the daughters that when more scrutiny was being put on Andrew and Fergie, that the daughters started receiving these large amounts of money along the lines of what they were earning a year at the time into their bank accounts. And there was also massive jewelry gifts to them, like jewelry that was 15, 20, 25 grand. And when they were asked about it, because there's been some court cases with other business people where this has come up, that this was gifted to them. And there has been a lot of stories in the past where royals were gifted jewelry because they would take it to jewelers, you know, they would strip it down and then be traded in for cash. But a lot of these stories that came out when it was scrutinized, like, where did this money come from? The daughters would say things like, oh, it was a birthday gift and the money was sent in, say, June, and their birthday was in January. And then they were also sent money from people that they didn't even know. And things like wedding gifts, when their wedding had like 20 people, the oldest daughter, Beatrice, because all of the stuff was going on with Andrew, she didn't have the whole like royal wedding televised and all of that. The younger daughter did because she got married first, but it just didn't make any sense whatsoever. And as I said, it does seem now, especially according to Andrew Loney, who has done extensive research on this, he has said that there's been a lot of the daughters exploiting their titles in the Middle East and opening like Saudi banks and things like that. And so again, I do think that, mark my words, there's going to be more coming out about the daughters, as apparently Prince William is kind of seeing the writing on the wall and asked them to open up their finances so that they could see that everything's in order and there's nothing sketchy going on, and they apparently refused. And so when you take all of these things into account, all of the examples, the 10-figure ski chalets and present rappers on staff, and just these large amounts of money coming in, and also Sarah Ferguson and Andrew will have all of these roles in companies, and they will also open a bunch of companies, and they're like receiving money as members and directors of certain companies that, again, there's no explanation of what they're doing. All of that should raise massive red flags, and yet nobody said anything, apparently. Hi guys, editing Ash here very quickly just to add something. I know there's lots of editing sections, but there's just more information coming out all the time, and also I keep finding more information because there's so much to dig into and so many years. But Sarah Ferguson and Andrew had all of these companies, dozens and dozens over the years, and ever since the Epstein files started to be released, coincidentally, all of these companies of Sarah Ferguson's, or sorry, actually, Margaret York and Andrew Inverness's companies, because they use those names as well for a lot of them, those companies started to be closed. There were a few open as of February 2026, but again, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that ever since Andrew was arrested, all of those remaining companies were closed. And again, there's no explanation what they were doing with these companies. And it, to me, looks very suspicious that they had so many with no explanation as to what was going on. And many of them were dormant or didn't seem to have anything going on. So just as a reminder, Sarah Ferguson was being bankrolled by Jeffrey Epstein for at least 15 years, but probably much more. And not only was she being given large sums of money, she was also having debt to employees paid by him. She was being flown out with her daughters, and he was paying for the tickets and everything like that. And I'm sure there is going to be much more that comes out as well. And the fact that there's all of these examples, along with all of the stories that have existed about Andrew, all of the Epstein ties, and Epstein was convicted in 2008, but there's also so many stories dating back years and years before that about Epstein and Maxwell. I've been hearing about Jeffrey Epstein since I was in my late teens. He is a massive, for lack of a better word, like blind celebrity. And there was even stuff about his island. I'm sure I can find examples of blinds decades ago. And all of those stories existed about him too. And even though Andrew claims he met Epstein in the late 90s, there's been new information given to Andrew Loney that date Epstein and Andrew's relationship back to the mid-80s. So over all of this time, all of these stories are being told. People are going to the palace. There even was a story yesterday, Sunday, the 22nd of February, that came out that there was a whistleblower who sent an email to the king in 2019 and raised Andrew's dodgy or allegedly dodgy business dealings and certain people that he was partnered up with. There's all of this happening, and the palace has some of the best intelligence in the world. They even have former MI5 and MI6 members. They are told absolutely everything, and yet nothing was known about this, and just a blind eye was turned. I think that some of the best evidence of the fact that this was an open secret is the fact that 25 years ago there was a story in The Guardian that, as I mentioned at the beginning, when you read it, it is astounding how accurate it is for what is happening today. And I'll read you a quote from it, but I'll leave the full thing linked down below. And I wanted to read this just before I go into the letter or card that was sent to Andrew from King Charles after the Newsnight interview, because I think that it just really speaks to what the royal family, their attitude has been over the last several decades with Andrew and his behavior. This article came out just as Andrew was given the trade envoy position. It was run in response to him being given this position. And in the article, there's even a paragraph that mentions Ghislaine Maxwell and how the Guardian was saying it's very concerning, and people were saying it's very concerning that he has this close relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell. But I think the part that is just really wild to read now is this quote that I'm going to read. The appointment had the backing of the Queen, but stunned palace aides and politicians. They believe Andrew's personality and lifestyle make him a disastrous choice. That fear of the prince dealing with the press, as he'd said in a quote, he's going to now be dealing with the press. One Labour MP said last night, "When I heard about this, I couldn't believe it. It shows an appalling lack of judgment. I suppose there are some countries where his presence might impress, but he is a liability. However, the prince is convinced he can help restore the royal family's battered reputation." Peter Mandelson is understood to have given behind-the-scenes backing for Prince Andrew's cause. The former Northern Ireland secretary met him when working on the NSPC's Full Stop campaign against child abuse, which Prince Andrew chaired. So, in case you don't know, Peter Mandelson is also someone who is currently being investigated for his friendship and ties to Jeffrey Epstein. And he has had a lot of stuff come out in the Epstein files, being given money, his husband being given money. Of course, he is gay, mentioned his husband. So there hasn't been any accusations, of course, with women and young girls through the Epstein files, but there has been things like pictures of him in his tidy-whities, which, why is that happening? Why? So I just, who hangs out with people like doing that? It just all points towards what the I don't even know what to say anymore. Like, why would this be happening?
Hi guys, editing Ash and a very sleepy editing G here. We as if G's gonna speak. Well, she can speak and she's an excellent communicator, but I just wanted to jump in and do a very quick but not small, certainly for the person concerned anyway, update. And that is that Peter Mandelson, after I filmed this, was also arrested, and he'd actually had his home searched prior to Andrew's arrest, but wasn't arrested when that happened. As I mentioned in the video, Andrew had both his home at Marsh Farm that he's temporarily living in and his previous estate or royal lodge, the massive 30-bedroom house. Those were both searched, and actually just a day ago they finished searching Royal Lodge, so they were almost searching it for a week. It is a huge place, and as I'm showing you, I'm sure on the screen, the cops had massive moving trucks and things to, I'm sure, take out lots of documents, and especially electronics and hard drives and phones and anything they can find like that. So Mandelson has also been released with no charges, and he actually had to surrender his passport. And the reason that they arrested Mandelson so quick, because they said that they weren't actually going to arrest him quite this suddenly, because they're still going through everything that they took out of his home and they got in the search. But they felt they had to because the speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, sent in a tip, or a rumor basically, that he had heard that Peter Mandelson was going to flee the country. He didn't have any like evidence or proof, and it was just a rumor. But because this is such a high profile case, and if he did end up fleeing the country, I mean, the cops would look so incompetent. So they did arrest him, but they did release him. Similar sort of time to Andrew, like 10 or 11 hours that he was in custody. There's a few other little updates and edits that I need to add here and there because there has just been more information that's come out. But I will jump in when warranted to give you any pertinent updates. And back to past me. When Andrew was arrested, I think not only were people surprised that it had actually happened and how quickly it had happened, but a lot of people were surprised that he had been arrested for misconduct in public office rather than the very, very serious, horrendous accusations that have been levied against him for over a decade at this point. And of course, the primary accuser was the late Virginia Giuffre, which I just cannot imagine the absolute bravery that she had to be able to stand up against all of these people that had so much power and influence and money. And I do not believe the arrest would have happened or any of this would be happening without Virginia's bravery. And it's just so sad that she is not here to see it. But the whole accusations from Virginia and allegedly a second unnamed accuser, nothing with that has moved forward. But there has been a lot of experts that I've watched, like interviews from like lawyers and things, and they have been saying that the misconduct in public office was easier to arrest him on because the proof is right there in black and white. And obviously Virginia's passed away and the other accuser is unnamed, so they don't have a victim to arrest him under that. But there obviously could be other people that could come forward. But what a lot of the lawyers were saying were, while he has been arrested for misconduct, because they are searching and continuing an investigation, and now that they have arrested him, there's a lot more lines opened up to investigate him, that they might be able to find evidence that would be able to bring up more charges against him. I have heard that there are going to be more charges against him and that they are trying to expedite this case. Usually you would think there would be quite a bit of time between an arrest and him being charged. And even the way that they've released him, like they haven't released him on bail, he's been released under investigation, which is incredibly unusual. But I do think that from what I've heard, there is going to be a swiftness to this case and that there probably is more charges coming. The only thing that I think is really working against them and finding evidence is the fact that it has been years and years since these accusations came forward, and the royals are known for getting rid of information, because there's even stories from very recently with the Queen where one of her very loyal employees, Paul, who, if you read like Paul Burrell's book, who I'll tell you something very interesting about him at the end of the video, Paul Burrell and Tall Paul, so they call them like Small and Tall Paul, worked for the Queen, and Tall Paul was her like confidant basically for about 20 years. And very unusually, it wasn't like a historian or anything that was asked to go through the Queen's documents and organize them and things. It was Paul. And so a lot of historians have said, we shouldn't really be doing that because who knows what's actually going to make it into archives and what's not. There were stories about Princess Margaret, the Queen's sister, that when the Queen Mother died, she burned a bunch of stuff. There were stories about when Prince Philip passed that there was a lot of documentation destroyed, and they weren't under accusations. And so also the fact that they are still searching Andrew's former home at Royal Lodge and searching his new home that he's moved into on the Sandringham estate. I mean, even just the fact he was moving, they would have been going through stuff. And I'm sure if they came across anything, it would have behooved them to
get rid of it. And they've even had hints that this was coming down the line for a long time. I spoke in my other Andrew video about the fact that Amy Robach, who is a journalist at ABC, she had the story about Andrew and Epstein. She had an interview with Virginia Giuffre. She had everything in 2010, before all of this, years and years before all of this. And when they put the story to the palace to give them like a right of response, the palace turned around, and this is like right around when William and Kate are going to get married, and ABC were told, if you run this story, you will never get any access to the royals again. And so the fact that, yes, that happened all the way back then, maybe there was cleaning up of things, but I guess they'll just have to do the investigation and see what turns up. But there does seem to be a lot of people coming forward. Even the people that I spoke to, the former palace staff, I mean, most of these people weren't high up. They weren't some private secretary or anything like that. They were mainly people that helped run the royal households. And so they saw a lot of stuff. But the people that I spoke to, they all signed NDAs and were told in no uncertain terms, like, you do not speak about anything that you're seeing. They're even told when they start the job, you're not allowed to keep like a diary or anything. And one of the staff members actually did keep a diary, and that's why I think her memory was so good, and she was able to tell me so many specific things, including the card that Charles sent Andrew. And I think that with the way that a lot of the palace staff spoke to me, so many of them ended up reaching out to me after they saw my Andrew video, because they were like, this is absolutely insane. And they were so disgusted with the way that this is being dealt with. And so they wanted to put the bit of information out there they could. I know some of them have also spoken to Andrew Loney, whose book I keep mentioning because, again, cannot recommend it enough. And they really just wanted to put the information they had out there, because in any way that it could help or shine some light on not only what was going on, but also the type of person Andrew was. There's the former Royal Protection Officer I mentioned, who has told many stories about Andrew screaming at palace staff, screaming at the security and royal protection officers, treating them like absolute subhumans. And I think that you'll start to see more of those people speak out. And there is a former royal maid who's told a story about when Andrew and it seems Epstein and Maxwell were at Sandringham, that they had some sort of adult party, and the maids had to clean it all up, including things like condoms and vibrators and things. And I think that you will see more people come out about that, because some of the staff told me that Andrew, just if something fell on the floor, he wouldn't pick it up. And there were stories that they told me about having to clean up every bodily fluid that you can imagine, because he wouldn't even flush a toilet or something like that, even after he'd been very ill and stuff like that. I know that's like probably gross to talk about, but that is the sort of person that you're dealing with. And so there will be stories about what was going on behind the scenes and what was happening at the Buckingham Palace apartment, what was happening at Royal Lodge. There's even stories coming out now about when he was on these business trade envoy trips paid for by UK taxpayers, that he was putting his massages on the tab of the UK taxpayers. So I think that you will see more stuff coming out. I think that people are really fed up, and I do think that it's just going to take a few people to break these NDAs, and then the floodgates will open, because, as I said, people are just sick of it. And so, as I mentioned, the letter that King Charles sent Andrew, I do think that people are really, really questioning what Charles knew, his involvement, because you'll see, again, a lot of these pro-royal publications are putting out these stories that it's all the Queen's fault, which I think that there's a lot of blame
for the Queen and the way that she turned a blind eye to Andrew, because there's so many people who complained about him over the years, his behavior, what he was doing on these trips, his business dealings, and she didn't want to hear about it. And I think that that is true, that she turned a blind eye and there's a lot of enabling, but you can't fully blame her. For the last several years of her reign, there was a sort of co-monarchy, because from about 9 months before the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, she was diagnosed with bone cancer, and the last several months of her life, she could not really see at all, she could barely hear, and she was in her 90s. There was a lot of stuff that was going through Charles, and he was fully across everything, allegedly. Even the payment to Virginia Giuffre, the payment was allegedly a combination of money from the Queen, from Prince Philip's estate, and allegedly from King Charles. And there have been people like Andrew Loney and one of the newspapers who, although the newspaper hasn't run the story, I believe, they have got pretty good evidence that this is the case. And I think that the monarchy and the palace are kind of panicking and trying to push all the blame on the Queen, because people really are asking questions and they don't like how the palace has handled this. They think they've dragged their feet, they've been too slow. And what, Andrew, yes, he had his titles taken away, but still technically he has them. He also, I saw a story this morning saying the staff at Sandringham are still being told to call him sir. There were reports a couple of months ago that the staff were still being expected to bow to him, which, in case you don't know, like when you're an HRH, His or Her Royal Highness, that is like the protocol of British citizens, that women should curtsy, men should bow, and they aren't supposed to use their HRH if they're not working members of the royal family, like Harry and Meghan aren't supposed to use them, but Andrew, he's supposed to have his strip. I've even started to see stories on mainstream media that are saying things like, should the king abdicate? Should William take over? Because it seems that William has never liked Andrew, has always had the read of him, and also has been pushing for Charles to act more decisively and more ruthlessly with Andrew, because William has pretty clean hands when it comes to everything in regards to Andrew. Again, it was Charles who tried to bring him and Sarah Ferguson back into the fold. And I do think that the one person, or the two people, that from all the stories I heard from former palace staff and other people that have relationships with various members of the royal family, William and Kate came off incredibly, incredibly well. And as I said, I do think there's much more to talk about, so much to talk about with William and Kate and Harry and Meghan, and I would love to do a video on them. But William and Kate, especially a lot of the staff who were footmen and cleaners and people like that, they had really nice things to say about them and said that they really went out of their way to, you know, if there was some event or something, they went like purposely down to find staff and thank them and like would give them little gifts and things, which I know, again, sometimes when I talk about like celebrities, it sounds like basic human decency, but unfortunately when it comes to a lot of celebrities, members of the royal family, or even just very wealthy people, many of them are lacking basic human decency. But how I was told William and Kate treat people, treat staff, it is very far removed from Andrew screaming at people and calling them cunts, and also not even flushing his own bathroom and making people come up at 3 a.m. to change the TV channel and stuff. And so William and Kate, I do think that a lot of people are asking, should things change? And while I don't think like Charles is going to be stepping down tomorrow or anything like that, this sentiment kind of building, you know, it's never good for the royal family or for the palace. And I do think this is absolutely
the biggest crisis ever for the royal family, far bigger than the abdication in the 1930s of Edward VIII. Anyway, I'm going to actually tell you about this card now because I can't stop talking about this. I find it so fascinating from like a historical standpoint. I've always been really interested in the royals, and that's why I'm like basically like pitching you, please let me do more videos about the royals. But the staff member who gave me the pictures from Buckingham Palace actually was kicking themselves and was saying I should have taken a picture of this card, but obviously they had no idea what was going to happen because again this was a few years ago, and it was post the Emily Maitlis interview because it was about it, and they said to me that the card was from King Charles and he sent it to Andrew as kind of a condolences after the interview, and the card basically said, very sorry about the interview and how you're being treated. It's a shame because everyone knows you're just pretty cheeky and you've always been cheeky and you didn't really do anything. So I don't understand how anyone could, what even just in isolation, say you knew nothing else and you just watched that interview, how that could be your interpretation. And I would bet my life that there was not just that interview watched in isolation. By this time in 2019, with some of the best intelligence in the world, and the fact that it has always been spoken about that Charles knew what Andrew was like, in that Guardian article that I mentioned, it even mentions that Charles was against his appointment as trade envoy because he thought he was going to take advantage of the position and would just go after women, play golf, enrich himself, and do business dealings that were unbecoming of a member of the royal family. So I just find it very strange that that is what you are saying to your brother after such a horrendous and disastrous interview. And it really, I think there is so many things that are coming out already about many people going to not only the Queen but to Charles and telling them what was going on with Andrew, but them just turning a blind eye. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if there's more information that comes out, more charges, and more former staff speaking out, because I think a lot of them want to clear their conscience and put what they know out there. The same way that even I was saying about the pictures, maybe they're just interesting for people to see, but there's maybe that small chance that they might be helpful to someone. But wait, there's more. I have a few little updates that I'm going to try and go through very quickly, and also the Paul Burrell little tidbit that I hope will be a appetizer for the William and Kate, Harry and Meghan video that I hope that people will want to see. Sorry, my brain is a little bit fried because I'm really tired, and you might be able to hear, that's why I don't have the light on, Miss G is actually snoring back there because she's passed out. But the updates. So I mentioned earlier in the video that it had been alleged and been talked about that Andrew was billing the UK taxpayers for his massages when he was a trade envoy over those 10 years in 2001 to 2011. And that's been pretty much confirmed now. Multiple newspapers and news outlets have talked about it, and also has the authority on the horrendous behaviour of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, that being Andrew Lowney. So that, I think, is just one of many things that's going to come out about the expenses for the trade envoy position, because I don't think that's going to be something they're going to be able to kind of hide and shred the shit out of the documents, because while some information and things say Andrew could shred it and the palace could maybe like hide it or whatever, I feel like very conspiracy when I say this, but I mean, look what's happened. But the expenses will have been recorded so many places and had so many sign-offs and things like that, that surely that won't be easy to hide when they release these Andrew files after, I mean, God knows when they're going to release them, because they said they're going to release them after, you know, the investigation and everything is concluded. So it might honestly be years before we see these, but probably given that what he's been charged, or not charged with, but given what he was arrested for, the investigation I would assume is going to look into the expenses and things as well. So we might get it come out that way. So a few other just little things that I felt were worth mentioning. I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but whenever I start a video, I like make a timeline and everything like that. And I also got some information from all the sources below, but I think that that picture of Andrew that came out in the last Epstein drop, where he's like on all fours over, like leering over the top of a looks like young woman, I think took that picture or had that picture taken when he was on that trip to break up the friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. I just thought that was like an interesting thing to mention. And while I've been making this, I think it was 2 days ago, maybe 3 days ago, this happened. While I was actually in London, Princess Eugenie was paparazzied outside like a coffee place in London. And to me, as someone who sees a lot of paparazzi setup shots, to me, it looks like it was set up because she's just like standing out in the street with her husband having a coffee, and she's got like a baseball cap on, but it's like raised, and the pictures are so clear and so just dead on that it looks to me like, oh, this is a setup, but let's try and not make it obvious. Like, I'm gonna have a baseball cap and everything on. And as I said in the video too, they have a massive, expensive PR machine. So I think that that picture will have been set up to kind of be like, look, I'm out here, like I'm keeping calm and carrying on. I'm not, I've got nothing to hide, sort of thing. Whereas the oldest daughter, Beatrice, the kind of discussion from people that have royal sources and stuff is that she is on the edge and is having a really, really difficult time with it and can't sleep and can't eat and things. And she seems to be a lot more involved with things. She was very keen and actually involved with Andrew during the Newsnight interview. So we'll see what happens with them. But I do think there's going to be more information that comes out about them. And also Andrew Loney, I know I've said his name a million times, but I joined his Substack, of course, and he actually put out an article today that talks about how Beatrice's 18th that Epstein and Weinstein and Maxwell went to was over 500,000 for a birthday party. And again, that just goes into the how did this not raise red flags? Of course it did, but the palace and the queen and everybody was just looking the other way, in my opinion. I think that's it for the Andrew and his family updates, but just very interestingly, and a little tidbit is that Paul Burrell, one of the palace staff, told me that of course, he very much exaggerated his relationship with Diana, which I don't think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that. But allegedly, before Diana went to Paris, Paul Burrell was found to be helping himself to items and information. And when Diana would have come back from Paris, if she didn't tragically pass away, she was going to allegedly fire Paul Burrell. And I do think that this lines up with everything that happened with him because he took so much of Diana's stuff. He literally was taking her underwear and said that it was for safekeeping and it was actually going to go to court. But the only reason it wasn't is because the royal family didn't want all of their secrets out there. And so the queen suddenly remembered that she gave Paul Burrell permission to take all of this stuff. And he actually has just released a new book about the queen and all the other talk about royal life and like his experience. And all of the palace staff I spoke to said that he is just absolutely despised for all of the information that he's put out. And again, I don't think that will shock a lot of people who are like really abreast of what's going on in the royal family, but I had never heard the thing about him apparently was set up to be fired when Diana would come back. So I just found that really, really interesting. And that will be another thing that I'll go much more into in the William and Kate and Harry and Meghan video. But just for the end of the video, back to past me. Also, leave MVP below if you made it to the end so I can thank you for watching. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye, guys.